Pokémon, medicine and martial arts. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author, we are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 426 Intention. Seeing her two best friends looking at her with questioning eyes, Air said nothing, simply shaking her head gently, signaling them with her eyes to wait a moment. Then, Air released her grip on Serena and Xiaoguang's wrists. Pursing her lips, she reached out her delicate hand and gently stroked Gyarados' large head. Feeling the gentle touch on his head, Gyarados, already feeling downcast due to Serena's misunderstanding, slowly raised his head. His once fierce expression suddenly shifted to a pitiful one. However, it did seem a bit out of place given his ferocious look. I think you have your own reasons for doing this, Gyarados. Gyarados hearing Air's gentle words, Gyarados let out a low cry, his voice filled with grievance. What is going on? Air's reminder finally brought Serena to her senses, but she was still a little confused. I'm not sure about that. I just feel like there's a hidden meaning behind Gyarados stopping us from helping the crab. Air was equally curious, but no matter how Gyarados expressed it, there was still a language barrier between the two. However, if you, or someone more familiar with Gyarados, were present at this moment, they would surely understand what they were trying to say. The reason Gyarados blocked the three women's path was actually Suicune's suggestion, though Gyarados' impatience got in the way first. What Serena and the other two didn't know was that just when the crab was surrounded by the four Pokémon of the Grips and the Frog, Yu's Pokémon, led by Gyarados, wanted to rush in and rescue the crab, showing those wild Pokémon that they weren't the only ones who could bully the few. However, the thought barely took hold when Suicune stopped them. Suicune had noticed that even facing the siege of four Pokémon, including Tadpole and Frog, Griffin's eyes remained resolute, unfazed by the sheer number of their opponents. It was that same look in Griffin's eyes that, when Suicune paused, Gyarados instinctively paused as well. Griffin's eyes felt vaguely familiar to Griffin, the same look it had when it was still Magikarp, the longing to become stronger, the desire to escape the ranks of the weak. Then, there was the scene where it had just stopped the three women from helping. Gyarados, empathizing with their situation, decided to use this opportunity to train Griffin, fulfilling its responsibilities as a senior. Perhaps it truly felt that Gyarados' actions held some special meaning. Serena, the other two women, and their Pokémon, now separated by Gyarados' massive bulk, neither anyone nor their Pokémon took another step forward, silently watching the events unfold. After the initial panic, Serena and Xiaoguang both calmed down. Reflecting on their son's words, they felt they had some truth. They had finally come to their senses. After all, Gyarados and Crawl were both Yu's Pokémon. Their daily relationship wasn't discussed, but if danger arose, they would undoubtedly help each other, not sit idly by. But looking at Gyarados' still pitiful expression, they both snorted, pretending not to notice, their gaze fixed on the five Pokémon poised for a fight. This wasn't limited to the three women, the other Pokémon also appeared ready to strike. It's worth noting that the four Pokémon, including the Frog and the Squirrel, who were besieging the Squirrel, were generally not very powerful. Two of the Squirrel were barely at the beginner level, suggesting they were, like Snorlax, newly hatched. On the other hand, the two Slugs, which looked like the parents of the Tadpoles, the larger one, apparently the male, was surprisingly elite level, just like the giant crab. As for the other Slug, it was a bit weaker, only at the average level. However, facing such a combination of Slugs and Tadpoles, the giant crab would likely be overwhelmed. The atmosphere was tense, almost explosive. Even the spectators and Pokémon on shore were no better, holding their breath, fearing their actions could affect the outcome. Finally, it was unclear which Pokémon made the first sound. The cry was like a fuse, instantly igniting the entire atmosphere. Remembering Yu's teaching, strike first, strike later, and suffer the consequences. The giant crab reacted swiftly, unleashing a powerful crab punch on its claws. However, for some unknown reason, the giant crab didn't strike at any of the surrounding Pokémon, instead striking directly at the calm water. Its two massive fists fell like two stones dropped mercilessly upon a still surface. Even as the water splashed, the giant crab wasn't about to give up. Its claws continued to glide through the water, creating a semicircle. The continuous movement of its fists sent a half-meter-long wave flying. Then, as the giant crab's fists abruptly stopped, the half-meter-long wave, like a kite with its string cut, inertia sent it plummeting like a torrent of water, aiming to drench the mosquito frog family. However, as a family of water Pokémon, they were certainly not afraid of being drenched. So, what was the giant crab's purpose behind this move? Would the giant crab's supposed preemptive strike prove such a grave mistake? Seeing the giant crab's seemingly unnecessary, superfluous attack, not only Serena and the other two were getting anxious, but even Air was getting nervous. If she hadn't been constantly reminding herself, Air would probably have been the first to rush out. What's wrong with the giant crab? Why did the first crab punch hit the water? If you have any votes, please give some to Kinayu. Otherwise, it will be refreshed the next day. Chapter 427 Target. Even Xiaoxu, who is relatively weak in Pokemon battles, had her say after training and spending so much time with Ryu, who is practically a top-tier Pokemon. No Pokemon should make such a low-level mistake. Isn't it a clear waste of a prime opportunity to attack first? This time, Serena remained silent. Her beautiful eyes remained fixed on the shrew, her thoughts unclear. Meanwhile, while Air and his three daughters were racking their brains to understand why the shrew had acted this way, the Pokémon, led by Gyarados and Suicune, were already engaged in a conversation. Gyarados, not bad. That shrew is quiet, but he's definitely made great progress. Suicune, yeah, you did well. But don't get too excited, it's only the beginning. And what if Shrew's plan doesn't work? Gyarados, I know, but overall it's still good. He's not as impulsive and reckless as before. He really has a good brain. Among all the Pokémon, Suicune and Gyarados are arguably the most experienced and also the strongest. Therefore, even though the battle had just begun, while Serena and the other Pokémon hadn't figured out the ropes, Gyarados and Suicune were already chatting, even commenting on the battle that had just begun, like a boss giving orders. At least among Pokémon, no matter how junior you are, as long as you possess sufficient strength, you are the boss. As for those with less power, they have little say in the current situation. After all, your own strength isn't that high, so how can you possibly discern the situation of others? Take Ditto and Buzzbit, for example. While still watching the battle between the Crawler and the Crawler, they were also listening to the conversation between the two leaders, though they were completely bewildered. This might be due to their low power. It's worth mentioning that Buzzbit has immense potential. In just a short period of time, it has already transcended its infancy and grown tremendously in strength. Although it's still at the average level, it's just a hair's breadth away from reaching elite status. At the very least, Buzzbit should be able to fight the former Rocket Sparrow on equal terms. Even you wouldn't be so sure about the Rocket Sparrow's current strength, as it was currently under the care of Professor Oak, the former youngest champion of Kanto. Although Ditto was curious, he felt embarrassed to speak up, so he asked Buzzbit, a junior, to ask. Buzzbat, what the hell is going on, Gyarados-senpai? Why doesn't Crab do any actual damage? Facing its junior, Gyarados was quite willing to share his knowledge with it. Glancing at Ditto next to him, he didn't seem to be targeting anyone in particular. Gyarados, that's because Crab is taking advantage of the situation. Seeing that Gyarados had said only so much and didn't say anything more, Buzzbit didn't feel comfortable asking any more questions. It was worthwhile to observe Crab's subsequent battle carefully. His attention returned to Crab's battle. The waves created by Crab's crab punch pelted Stygius and Stygius. While they didn't get soaked, the waves obscured the vision of the four Pokémon. Although they were all water-type Pokémon, the impact of the waves made them instinctively close their eyes. At the very moment the Gnat Frog and Gnat Tadpole closed their eyes, the crab moved. Despite its forelegs and its horizontal crawling motion, the density of the water at that moment didn't hinder the crab's speed. The waves obscured its vision, preventing any Pokémon from reacting quickly. By the time they finally realized what was happening, they could only see a white, glowing crab fist growing larger and larger behind the splashing water. The crab's first Pokémon to be attacked wasn't the strongest male Gnat Frog, but the two weakest Gnat Tadpoles. Ordinary people and Pokémon would think that the strongest would be the first to be attacked, as weaker enemies are nothing to them. In other words, once the boss is defeated, the remaining smaller enemies will be no problem. However, Yu didn't see it that way. He believed that when facing a large-scale siege, the principle of capturing the leader first was the right one. If facing a smaller siege, then it's perfectly reasonable to eliminate the weaker ones. This not only prevents them from using a relentless attack, but also prevents them from being attacked from behind during the boss fight. Perhaps from the outset, influenced by Yu's master's intentions, the giant crab had its sights set on the two tadpoles, even as it deliberately rested on the surface. Thus, completely unprepared, the two tadpoles were instantly incapacitated by a single Pokémon and a single crab punch from the giant crab. By the time the two tadpoles reacted and tried to rescue their children, it was too late. In that instant, seeing their two children completely incapacitated, the two tadpoles erupted in fury, especially the male, who seemed to be unleashing a cosmic energy. In that instant, both tadpoles simultaneously unleashed their water guns. While the water gun isn't as powerful as the water cannon, its release is more durable. If the water cannon is a one-time item, the water gun is a continuous item, providing a constant supply of energy. But honestly, compared to the water cannon's power, the water gun's power isn't that great. Otherwise, water Pokémon would normally use water guns instead of water cannons when assisting firefighters in extinguishing fires. After all, water guns are gentler and lack the devastating power of water cannons. Don't expect them to just help put out the flood, consider it a blessing that they didn't cause any trouble. Chapter 428 Water Gun. Mosquito coils. Two jets of water shot out from the two mosquito-repellent frogs, whose bellies were pierced with mosquito coil strips. While the power of each jet wasn't particularly strong individually, when the two jets merged, they possessed the power of a water cannon. The two jets resembled two flying arrows, their tips radiating a faint white glow. Big Claws feeling two powerful gusts of wind from the side, the big claw crab didn't bother to attack again, hastily retracting its crab fists. Then, it swiftly released a bubble beam, attempting to block the two water guns' attacks. However, the big claw crab's bubble beams were used too hastily, and faced with a continuous onslaught of water, the crystal-clear bubbles were quickly defeated. The battle between the water guns and the bubble beams was clearly gaining ground in the big claw crab's direction. The two slugs' attacks were perfectly timed. Faced with a constant retreat of the foam beams, the slug tried to use any skills to resist, but it was already powerless. The two water jets successfully hit the slug, and due to the inertia of the force, the slug slid backwards towards the surface. Fortunately, the slug was a water-type Pokémon. Any other Pokémon would have been slammed underwater. Even so, the slug still looked incredibly messed up. Big claws, the slug erupted in anger. After regrouping, its forelegs pulsed rapidly as it swiftly approached the two slugs. It unleashed its crab punch once again, apparently intending to engage in close combat. With the two tadpoles no longer able to fight, the slugs no longer adopted a front and back flanking formation. Instead, they stood side by side, slightly tilted, forming a horn-like formation to restrain each other. After all, these two mosquito-repellent frogs were a married couple, and they had a certain understanding. Facing another attack from the giant crab, the two mosquito-repellent frogs were furious. Clearly, the two water pistols hadn't quenched the rage of their children's incapacity. Seeing their fury still lingering, the culprit who had incapacitated their children dared to launch the first attack. The two mosquito-repellent frogs were even more furious. Two streams of water, even more powerful than the previous ones, erupted directly from the patterns on their mosquito-repellent bellies. However, the giant crab had already prepared for this attack. Its gleaming crab fists, like two sledgehammers, met the two water pistols head-on, one by one. However, the water gun's jets were too powerful. Even with its considerable strength, the crab, when its two crab punches were mirrored by the water gun, felt nearly sent flying again. But relying on its previous training with Gyarados and the others, it managed to steady itself. Gyarados, that crab underestimated its foe. He took its attacks head-on without even understanding its strength. Shui, indeed, this seems like a good opportunity to give this brat a good beating, or he'll suffer later. From the outset of the battle, Suicune and Gyarados had been watching the crab's every move. Seeing the crab resist the water gun, their brows furrowed. They thought the crab was either overconfident or overconfident. Clearly, the crab was the latter. It's important to note that while Yu is a battle fanatic, He's not one to act without thinking. After every battle, Yu always reflects on himself and works on self-improvement. Generally speaking, Yu is a battle fanatic, but more importantly, he reflects on himself through constant battle, a process of continuous improvement. Therefore, while Yu's fighting style tends to favor hard-fought confrontation, it's not mindless. He typically understands his opponent's strengths before truly unleashing his full might. Deeply influenced by Yu's philosophy, Arceus and Suicune naturally find some disapproval of the crab's lack of strength yet excessive arrogance. The battle raged on, undiminished by Arceus and Suicune's discussion, but instead intensified. Perhaps the two frogs had an agreement, or perhaps it was a tacit understanding, but from the very beginning, they hadn't used any other skills besides water gun. And it was this seemingly simple, yet ineffective, water gun that caused Crab considerable suffering. Often, the Crab didn't advance much before being pushed back by the water gun. It wasn't as if the Crab didn't consider using other skills to counterattack, but the combined power of the two water guns overwhelmed its other ranged attacks. Bang! Having abandoned its ranged attacks like Bubble Beam, the Crab, after once again swinging its claws to attack without success, was already panting. While it might not have been a fair fight, the attritional battle was certainly taking its toll on both sides. The Crab attacked with its Crab Fist, while the two frogs defended and blocked with their water tanks, taking a heavy toll on both sides. However, thanks to Yu's constant training of his Pokémon possessed significantly better stamina than ordinary Pokémon. Remember, these were two frogs, and with their complementary strength, while their stamina was somewhat depleted, they weren't completely exhausted. In short, both Pokémon still had some fighting power, but only a little. The situation was critical for both sides, and even the slightest mistake would result in their losing their fighting ability. As time wore on, the fight grew increasingly heated, and the Crab, in this tense moment, unleashed a powerful move. Swinging its Crab Fist, it struck the surface once again, instantly replaying the scene before everyone and the Pokémon. Chapter 429, Subjugation. Though it was a tactic already used, it seemed incredibly effective this time, a tactic of surprise and deception. Indeed, once again, facing the giant crab, the crab punch sent ripples through the water. The two mosquito frogs had no time to react, their vision once again obscured. The water splashed, and only a tiny gap revealed the giant crab's approaching form. Facing such a sudden attack, it wasn't that the mosquito frogs were unprepared, it was simply that they hadn't anticipated it. But at this moment, it was clear they realized too late. While the moment their vision was obscured, the two mosquito frogs instinctively launched their water guns. Their aim was ultimately off. One of the two water jets missed the giant crab's body, while the other struck it squarely. However, facing this water jet, the giant crab, just as before, unleashed its crab punch, smashing the incoming water jet all over its body. The water gun, originally aimed straight at the giant crab, was suddenly forced to redirect its attack. This series of actions, though seemingly taking an eternity, took only a few breaths. Finally, the giant crab achieved its goal, closing in on the two mosquito frogs. Then, without hesitation, it unleashed two powerful crab punches, slamming them down hard. These punches, embodied by the giant crab's unwavering determination to succeed, and with its sheer force, the two mosquito frogs were unsurprisingly rendered completely incapacitated. With the battle over, Serena, who was holding it, was the first to cheer. Great! The giant crab wins. That's truly impressive, Xiaoguang agreed. Air also smiled with relief, but then, looking at the mosquito tadpoles and mosquito frogs floating on the surface of the river, their incapacity shrouded in circles, her bright eyes flickered. Hey, Serena and Xiaoguang, haven't you been saying before that you're short on Pokémon? Isn't now a good time? Listening to Air's somewhat incoherent words, Serena and Xiaoguang were both a little confused. Serena, the most outspoken of the three girls, blinked her still dazed eyes amidst a haze of questions and asked, Air, what are you talking about? How does this relate to our lack of Pokémon? Yes, Air. Although we did say before that we're short on Pokémon, do you have any good Pokémon recommendations? Xiaoguang gently stroked her hair behind her ear, looking at Air expectantly. Seeing the two sisters' curious glances, Air played the suspense, ignoring the tense atmosphere after the battle, and playfully glanced at them, almost blinking. What do you think of the frog or the tadpole? Frog, tadpole, Xiaoxu and Serena exclaimed in surprise at the same time, but they were still a little confused. What do you mean, Air? Do you want us to subdue the mosquito frog or the mosquito tadpole? This time it was Xiaoxu who asked first. Serena said it with a thoughtful look. Seeing that Air did not answer her, but just showed a mysterious smile, Xiaoxu could not help but become more anxious. Oh. Air, please tell me quickly. I'm really anxious to death. And where can we find the mosquito tadpole and mosquito frog now? As soon as Xiaoxu finished speaking unconsciously, Serena's eyes suddenly lit up, and she looked at Air in disbelief, realizing that she was a little speechless. After holding it in for a long time, she blurted out 3 words that made Xiaoxu collapse. You mean, Hayaka? Air stretched out his hand and made a pistol shape, and smiled at Serena and the still dazed Xiaoxu. Selina, you are right, that's what I think in my heart. Xiaoxu, what's wrong with you today? You look so absent-minded. You would have guessed it any other time. What? Sorry, Xiaoxu asked, confused and reflexive, before lowering her head in apology with a look of disappointment. I'm convinced too. Air looked completely defeated, slapping her forehead and sighing helplessly. Serena, on the other hand, just covered her mouth and chuckled, not joining in the conversation. She seemed to have become a spectator, anticipating the next developments. Okay, I'll be honest. Did the giant crab just defeat 2 tadpoles and 2 mosquito frogs? You can take this opportunity to continue conquering them. Air didn't hide anything, and directly expressed her thoughts. Really? Conquer the mosquito frogs and tadpoles from just now, Air? Are you sure you're not kidding? Xiaoxu seemed to have just realized what was happening, her face filled with surprise and disbelief. Of course it's true, why can't they be captured? Xiaoxu, you're not still thinking who defeated the wild Pokémon? Just convince that person. Wake up. If you can capture the Pokémon now, you're the ultimate winner. You know, in this world, even Pokémon are snatched away, even if they already have owners. Air's expression was matter of fact, leaving Xiaoxu silent for a moment. She knew Air's words were true, but she still had a lingering feeling. To her, capturing Pokémon, and having Pokémon captured, was a sacred event. But now, after Air's words, it seemed a bit casual. Perhaps Xiaoxu was just being overly snarky. After all, Pokémon were real, and this was how real people and Pokémon interacted. It wasn't like those myths and legends in Pokémon academies, where students were taught using computerized textbooks resembling video game consoles, where one person could only convince one Pokémon under specific circumstances. The real Pokémon world wasn't entirely a cold, mechanical machine. Whether people or Pokémon, they all had feelings. In the earliest days, when there were no Pokéballs, both people and Pokémon were bound together by affection. As the saying goes, when affection arises, capturing comes naturally. This is why many trainers possess their own Pokémon before they reach adulthood, and then capture them naturally as adults. Chapter 430 Forget It. Seeing Xiaoxu completely lost in thought, Air didn't bother interrupting her, knowing she had her own thoughts at the moment. Air's gaze shifted primarily to Serena, who was watching the show, and asked with a chuckle, So, Serena, what do you think about this? What? You mean about taming the frog or the tadpole? Serena feigned surprise, meeting Air's eyes, which seemed to hold a boundless spiritual energy. Air, with a knowing, yet still sullen expression, rolled her eyes. Serena stuck out her tongue sheepishly, her earlier scowl gone, now tinged with playfulness. I think we'll forget about taming the tadpole and frog, Serena said without hesitation. Why? Air looked at Serena curiously. Serena, looking at the 4 Pokémon that had completely lost their ability to fight, showed a complex emotion in her eyes. Well, I think Serena is right. Let's forget about taming Pokémon. Xiaoxu had already reacted by then. She first glanced at the 4 Pokémon that had completely lost their ability to fight, then looked at Air's serious face. Hey, why does even Xiaoxu say that? Air pouted, revealing a look that was completely different from her usual little girlish demeanor. How should I put it? Call me pretentious, or call me hypocritical. Looking at the Pokémon and Pokémon family, I really can't bear to separate them. Serena gave a wry smile and touched the Firefox that she had just held in her arms. So that's what you're worried about. That's no problem at all. You can capture all 4 of them. Or we can each capture 1. You, me, Xiaoxu, and you, 1 each, exactly 4, Air counted on her fingers, even thinking about who would own the 4 Pokémon. Forget it, though. I don't know if it's Yu's influence, but now I'm more inclined to capture Pokémon on my own, Serena said seriously, and her beautiful eyes could see her desire to improve her own abilities. Don't look at me, don't look at me. I also agree. We prefer a mutually agreed upon settlement, rather than having to capture Pokémon without their knowledge. Otherwise, they'll be unhappy. If those bad things you mentioned happen, that'll be a real headache. Xiaoxu also waved her hands repeatedly to refuse. Seeing her 2 best sisters reject her proposal one after another, Air couldn't help but puff up her cheeks slightly, looking very annoyed. Okay, I get it. I'm doing this for your own good, aren't I? Really, after you say that, I seem like an unforgivable villain. Air pretended to be very angry and turned her head to the side, but her eyes kept glancing at Serena and Xiaoxu, as if to say, come and comfort me. Puff Serena and Xiaoxu both covered their mouths and laughed secretly. Serena cooperated with Air very well, pretending to beg for mercy, and stepped forward to grab Air's hand. Okay, we were wrong. Let's apologize to Miss Air, okay? Please forgive us if you are magnanimous. Well, Serena, you are really something. But since you said so, I will be merciful and forgive you. Seeing that her little trick had succeeded, Air also showed a happy smile. Xiaoxu simply walked over, holding Vulpix. For some reason, neither Serena nor Xiaoxu had consciously embraced their Pokémon when they were outside, as if Firefox and Vulpix were imbued with some magical power, or perhaps holding a Fire-type Pokémon this way would keep them warm? This was the same with Air even before Firefox evolved into Long-tailed Firefox. Alright. Let's all go check on the crab, the tadpole, and the frog. Without waiting for the other women to say anything, Xiaoxu took the lead, grabbed Air, and ran towards the riverbank. Even after the battle, Gyarados, Suicune, and the rest of the Pokémon had rushed directly towards the crab. After the fight, the crab was exhausted from the effort. Its mouth was already covered in foam, and its body, like a dead crab, floated limply on the surface, letting the current carry it in its direction. With its eyes rimmed with circles, the crab drifted on and on, unconsciously. Then, still unconscious, it felt its body lighten, and then it was completely airborne. Drowsy, it struggled to open its eyes, only to be greeted by the large face of its idol. This startled the crab. It had been unconscious, battling a female crab. How could it have suddenly transformed into a burly, rugged figure? Its heart pounded with fear, and it rolled over like a lazy man, tumbling directly from Gyarados' massive tail into the stream. Serena and the other 2 happened to witness this, and their fears grew again. What's wrong? They wondered. How could they explain to Yu later, but their suspicions were evidently exaggerated. After Gyarados' torment, the crab regained its composure. At least the foaming at the mouth had stopped, and they were able to flow normally, though they felt as if they were about to be swept away by the stream. At this moment, the 4 completely incapacitated Nat Pokémon and Nat Pokémon Tadpole slowly regained consciousness. Seeing themselves surrounded by so many unfamiliar Pokémon, they immediately leaped to their feet. The 2 Nat Pokémon reacted most violently. Faced with the onlookers, both unfamiliar Pokémon and humans, they acted like frightened water rabbits. Not caring about their newly awakened parents, each tadpole grabbed hold of one of them and immediately bolted across the water. Frightened, they darted about like headless flies. Chapter 431 Decision. Darkness enveloped the land, but it couldn't obscure the bustle of activity. In the forest where Serena and the other 2 were, one of countless other lively scenes unfolded. The previously tense atmosphere in the stream was now a scene of chaos, a state of turmoil. The startled slugs, each grabbing one of their parents, prepared to flee as quickly as possible. However, surrounded by other unfamiliar Pokémon, they hesitated. They instead ran towards the more familiar slug, attempting to break out. And precisely because of the slug's thoughts, the slug suffered a tragic fate. First, its beautiful dreams were shattered by Gyarados, and then, frightened, it fell directly into the stream. Perhaps it was because the 2 slugs seemed oblivious to the slug, a massive entity, right in front of them. The speed was like floating on water. With the combined power of the 2 Pokémon, the vastly superior crab was undoubtedly sent flying, sending a massive wave of spray flying in the distance. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, darkness enveloped everything. Aside from the scattered moonlight filtering through the leaves, there was no light at all. At that moment, A dark figure darted through the trees, sometimes leaping and darting across the treetops like a monkey monster, sometimes sprinting through the woods like a leopard. Through the scattered light and the shadow cast by the lock on the ground, one could vaguely make out the figure walking upright, its form very small. If one didn't look closely, one might even miss it in the darkness. Its fur, illuminated by the scattered sunlight, was a stark black and white. Naughty. After an unknown amount of time, the figure finally stopped its rapid pace. It panted heavily, glancing back repeatedly as if something terrifying was following it. From its slightly rapid breathing, one could vaguely hear its nervousness. It turned out to be the Pokémon previously pursued by Organization S. While Yu was helping to hold off the S group, the Pokémon had taken the opportunity to flee. Perhaps sensing a threat, the Pokémon had already taken flight without even seeing the person who had helped it. Fearing the enemy might catch up again and capture it once more in the dark, small room filled with sophisticated equipment, the Pokémon had simply chosen a direction and continued running all the way to where it was now. Truly tired, it paused to rest, but its gaze was clearly alert. Even if a wild Pokémon streaked by, it would likely be on edge for a long time. Naughty. After taking deep breaths of the air, tinged with a hint of evening breeze, the Pokémon finally had time to take in its surroundings. Because it was pitch dark, the Pokémon hadn't felt the entire journey. But the sudden stop, coupled with a complete silence behind it, gave it a shiver of fear. Although there was moonlight, the scattered glimmers couldn't dispel the fear and darkness within the Pokémon. The Pokémon seemed still on guard, finding a large tree to lean against. Slowly, it curled up, its eyes no longer tense, but rather dazed, and a soft humming escaped its lips unconsciously. In that moment, it felt as if time hadn't passed. Everything was utterly silent. The insect Pokémon's chirping ceased, the bird Pokémon's calls fell silent. Time seemed to have passed for a minute, yet it also felt like an eternity. It wasn't until a voice, tinged with joy, erupted from nowhere that the atmosphere was broken, seemingly shattering the darkness within the Pokémon. The Pokémon snapped out of its reverie, leaping to its feet and scanning the surroundings as if searching for the source of the sound. Finally, as if the Pokémon had found it, it barked a few times tentatively towards a certain location. Seeing nothing was amiss, the Pokémon once again took its short steps and darted swiftly in the direction it had chosen. In the blink of an eye, it was completely lost in darkness. Silence reigned once more, as if no living creature had ever been there before. It felt eerie, yet paradoxically peaceful. Two flowers bloom, each offering its own beauty. With a Pokémon being hunted by Organization S completely gone, the confrontation between Yu and Organization S began to draw to a close. After much deliberation, Yu finally came to an answer. He simply handed over everything he had discovered today to his godsister, Jun Shaling. This way, he might not be in such a difficult situation. Moreover, if he truly needed help, he could always go through Jun Shaling, and Yu would be ready to assist. Of course, sharing everything with Jun Shaling didn't mean Yu would sit idly by and watch her fall into danger. After all, Jun Shaling's strength was obvious to all. She was at least many times more powerful than Yu currently was. This was referring to the strength of her Pokémon. While Jun Shaling, as a member of a police family, possessed a certain level of strength, there was still a gap when compared to Yu's fellow Jianghu people. After all, they inhabited different worlds. Furthermore, in the eyes of both the other Jianghu people and Yu, their family seemed a bit too pretentious. While that was true, this world ultimately revolved around both humans and Pokémon. Therefore, if most of the problems can be solved by Pokémon fighting, few people will personally solve them. After all, if you really want to use force, there are still too many restrictions. Not to mention the Pokémon contract, the Pokémon League alone is another important factor. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432, Thunderstruck. Tell me, are you hiding something from me? If you don't tell me everything now, I can't guarantee what strange things Pikachu and Charmeleon will do next, Yu threatened with a calm expression, looking at the now obedient, almost servile, leader of the S organization before him. However, the leader of the S organization, though still standing, almost collapsed before Yu, kneeling before him. It was simply because Yu was so annoying. His questions were almost endless. It was like the paranoia of a prison escapee, repeating everything he'd already asked, as if only this could dispel his doubts. To determine if he was lying, Yu employed numerous tactics, not to mention threats and physical intimidation. Sometimes, Yu would even casually flex his muscles, discouraging his opponent from underestimating him and overwhelming him with his aura. "Brother, I called you brother. No, your uncle. You're my uncle. I beg you, please let me go. I've told you everything I know. I don't know anything else." The team leader's face was filled with sorrow, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you absolutely certain you're not lying to me?" "I'm absolutely certain I'm not lying to you. If I tell even one lie, may the heavens strike me with lightning." Just as the team leader finished his resolute words, a sudden, coincidentally loud rumble echoed from the horizon. It was thunder. At first, neither the team leader nor the other members of Organization S took it seriously, believing it to be the sound of a battle somewhere. After all, the sky was clear and the moon was bright. How could lightning appear out of nowhere? But what happened next completely shocked everyone present, including Yu. The bright yellow lightning, brimming with destructive power, struck the team leader without a single pause. Instantly, the team leader's entire body went pitch black, his hair wisping up in strands. Even as he collapsed to the ground, the rage only ended with wisps of white smoke emanating from his mouth. "Why the hell is this happening? I'm telling the truth," the team leader muttered to himself, despairing as he collapsed to the ground, his eyes filled with grief and indignation. Yu twitched his lips, his mind surfacing with a sense of relief. He glanced silently at Pikachu, standing to his left. While outwardly maintaining a calm demeanor, he secretly gave Pikachu a thumbs up. Of course, he still had to maintain a facade, especially when he saw Pikachu acting so impassive. Yu felt a surge of inexplicable anger, and then he gave Pikachu a savage beating. Seeing the charcoal heap lying before him, Pikachu, who had previously been enjoying the show-off, now focused entirely on his own work. Completely unaware of the approaching demonic hand, Pikachu felt only a sharp pain in his head, and instinctively covered his head and wailed. His next reaction was anger. With a stern, adorable face and a fierce expression, he glared at the culprit, his electric sacs on either side of his cheeks pulsing with electricity once again. But before Pikachu could utter a single word, Yu spoke first. "Pikachu, what are you doing? How can you randomly pick on anyone? Hurry and apologize to our team leader." Pikachu. Upon seeing their master, the group's Pikachus lost their temper, chirping a few times in frustration. Inwardly, they were muttering to themselves, "Why would I do this? It was all because of you. You didn't say anything. But we've worked together for so many years. How could I possibly know what you were thinking?" It was simply the method of Sai Li Yongzhi Jin. After intimidating the team leader with a wish, and then using this unguarded dormitory as if it were fate, it could cause the completely unsuspecting person to completely collapse in that moment, revealing all their secrets. After all, at that moment, the human heart is at its most vulnerable. This was an interrogation method Yu claimed to have developed after years of experience in the martial arts world. Pikachu grumbled inwardly, but dared not speak his mind. At Yu's signal, he simply snorted disapprovingly at the team leader, who was still lying on the ground, twitching and swirling with electric arcs. He appeared both arrogant and adorable. However, in the eyes of the team leader and the other members of Organization S, Pikachu was now a demon. After this incident, everyone present, except Yu, was terrified, fearing that the little demon on the other side would suddenly take a 100,000-volt attack or a thunder attack. By then, all the Pokémon had awakened, but even so, they no longer had the desire to fight Yu and his men. To demonstrate their sincerity, they even returned their Pokémon directly to their Pokéballs. You. Forget it, I can't do anything about you." Seeing Pikachu's attitude, Yu sighed helplessly. Then, looking at the team leader with an innocent smile on his face, he said, "Look, I really can't do anything with this kid. I'm so sorry, no thanks. Please be magnanimous and let us go." The team leader, supported by his subordinates, had a look of fear on his face. If it weren't for his still aching injuries, he wouldn't have bothered to kneel down and beg for mercy. What kind of people and Pokémon are these? What's this? Just a smiling tiger and a little devil. I used to think Charmeleon was the most ferocious, but now it seems like the most normal one among them. Looking at the expressions of the people on the other side, Yu touched his face, then looked at Charmeleon and Pikachu with a puzzled look and asked, "Oh, do your master, look scary? Why are those people on the other side looking at the starry sky, as if they have seen a very scary ghost-type Pokémon?" Chapter 433 Falling into the Water. Seeing their master's somewhat narcissistic expression, Pikachu and Charmeleon didn't respond immediately. Instead, they carefully examined their master's rather handsome face. Yiyu couldn't help but twitch his lips. He'd just casually mentioned these two boys. Were they really taking them so seriously? With a helpless wave of his hand, and a goodbye to Pikachu and Charmeleon, Yiyu turned and prepared to leave. "Anyway, take care of yourselves. If I see you hurting Pokémon again, it won't just be lightning. It could be fire or flooding." These cold yet playful words were uttered by Yiyu lightly. Then, under the relieved gazes of the S organization members and the Pokémon, his figure gradually disappeared into the darkness. "Huh? So scary, so scary. That evil star is finally gone. Who says it isn't? He looks so sunny, but there's actually a demon inside him." As soon as Yiyu left, the place erupted in joyful celebration. "Haha, I've remembered everything you said. You'd better pray you don't run into me next time." These words, suddenly uttered from nowhere, were like a bucket of cold water. They chilled everyone present, both human and Pokémon, to their core. Silence fell once again for a moment. Even after a long moment, no one dared to move, fearing that demon would silently appear next to them. Tonight, as usual, was remarkably quiet, but somewhere in the forest, a bustle of activity was unusually lively, shattering the quiet of this small area one by one. Somewhere in the forest, a dark shadow flashed by a stream. It was unclear whether it was due to its speed or the evening breeze. An emerald green leaf was blown directly into the water, then drifted slowly down the river. Along the river's direction, one could faintly see the glow of firelight illuminating the darkness, and the sounds of joyful laughter piercing the loneliness of the darkness. Then, the leaf, drifting along the river, bumped into a red object, halting its drift. Big claws. Then the red object slowly moved, revealing its red and white shell in its signature pair of large claws. Who else could this crab belong to if not Yiyu's? The leaf had drifted down the river, finally landing where Air and the others were camping. The crab had just recovered from the double blow from the two mischievous tadpoles. Looking at its companions playing around, the crab felt relieved, then once again concealed its body, letting itself float on the surface. Its mind was reeling back on its previous battles, and it began to reflect on its experiences. Perhaps this was the strength of Yiyu's Pokémon. Under Yiyu's influence, no matter which Pokémon he possessed, after a battle, regardless of victory or defeat, he would reflect on his gains and shortcomings. Perhaps it was the sheer comfort of soaking in the water that caused the crab to fall asleep, its body simply floating on the surface. Because of its floating state, its two claws naturally rested in the water. From a distance, if one didn't look closely, they looked like small red pebbles. The surrounding Pokémon also noticed the crab's plight, but they didn't bother it. Some even swam away considerately, leaving the crab alone in the small area. As for Serena and the other two, after confirming that the crab was safe, they left. After all, although their camp had already been set up, they still needed to prepare much for tonight. The only ones playing in the stream were Yiyu's Pokémon and the remaining Pokémon of the three women. As for the three Firefox Pokémon, they were assisting their master. Just like that, this small patch of land was divided into two parts. One section was land, and the other was just for the Pokémon playing in the stream. Unbeknownst to the girls' Pokémon, a soft rustling sound suddenly appeared in the bushes on the other side of the stream. The bushes, once half the height of an adult, suddenly trembled. Then, a dark figure emerged from the bushes, its eyes furtively scanning the surroundings. It finally fixed its gaze on the campfire burning across the way. Perhaps because of the tall trees on the other side, the shadows cast a shadow. The shadow's full form was momentarily obscured. Therefore, the Pokémon playing nearby were completely unaware of its presence. After observing for a while, seeing that no one was paying attention, it let out a long sigh. Only then did it have time to carefully examine its surroundings. Finally, its gaze shifted to the red object in the stream, and its eyes lit up slightly. Then, it separated a small, thick bush from the larger one and silently approached the edge of the stream. As if seizing the perfect moment, the black figure leaped out, and in just 2 strides, it landed on the red object it had seen. But before the black figure could rejoice in its safe landing, it felt its body lighten, and the object it was standing on began to sink. In a split second, the stream water had reached its calves. Before it could even call for help, it felt its feet go empty, and the object it had been standing on vanished. As the black figure neared the bottom of the water, it felt itself locked in a pair of eyes. And then, nothing happened. Bubbling with steam, a giant crab appeared. The red object the black figure had stepped on was the giant crab, which had fallen asleep. But after the black figure's sudden movement, the giant crab had fully awakened. When the crab opened its eyes, it looked into the other's eyes, which frightened it so much that it immediately stopped caring and started screaming. It even foamed at the mouth because of nervousness. If someone who didn't know what was happening saw it, they would think that the crab had made a terrible mistake and was frightened to the point of foaming at the mouth, and needed cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Chapter 434 Naughty Panda. Big Claw, oh my goodness. What the hell is going on? What? Which unfortunate kid is drowning? And even disturbing my sleep, Big Claw's voice rang out with a hint of discontent. Although it was deeply upset that a Pokemon had disturbed its sleep, it couldn't just stand by and watch. So, it dove into the water once again, grabbed the drowning Pokemon, and then used its long-lost power drill diving and swimming skills. The noise coming from Big Claw's side once again attracted other Pokemon. Before it could be seen, it was heard first. Gyarados' loud voice boomed from not far away. Gyarados, Big Claw, what are you doing, kid? Are you going to keep quiet for the rest of the night? Big Claw. When Big Claw emerged from the water, it was surrounded by figures, almost impenetrable, and pairs of eyes stared at Big Claw. Seeing this, the crab couldn't help but shrink its claws. After all, being surrounded by so many Pokemon was incredibly stressful. Crawl, are you okay? Who's this child? As the crab finally pulled a Pokemon ashore, Serena, who was closest to it, heard the noise and rushed over. Upon seeing the Pokemon rescued by the crab, she couldn't help but ask in confusion. Upon seeing Serena's arrival, the Pokemon consciously made way for her. Seeing the Pokemon dripping wet, Serena knelt down, picked it up, and headed straight for the campfire. Behind her were the other Pokemon. By then, the Pokemon had lost their interest in playing. After all, they were all curious about having saved a Pokemon. And most importantly, they were tired of playing. Serena, what's going on? Seeing Serena cradling a dripping Pokemon, Air approached, thoughtfully handing Serena a blanket. Xiaoxu, the team's Pokemon keeper and the only one of the three girls with some knowledge of Pokemon first aid and care, had already brought some medicine and carefully examined the Pokemon. With some manipulation and fussing, Xiaoxu quickly stabilized the Pokemon. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Xiaoxu let out a relieved smile. Now she had time to inquire about the Pokemon's origins. Serena, come to think of it, I don't even know what this Pokemon is. Why don't you introduce it to us? Serena was taken aback by Xiaoxu's question. It was obvious that if Xiaoxu didn't know about the Pokemon, it must be something she had never seen before, or perhaps something from outside the Kanto region. But it was obvious, judging by the appearance of this Pokemon, that it was likely all the Pokemon native to the Kalos region. At this thought, a blush crept across Serena's pretty face. Serena, you really weren't serious in school, Air chuckled, covering her mouth. The teasing made Serena blush again. Finally, to avoid embarrassment, she said with a hint of pride, Who said I didn't know? No, isn't it a black and white panda? But her words seemed to lack confidence. Serena's voice gradually faded as she spoke, her head lowering, almost burying itself in her chest. Pachihi, Serena, why do I remember this Pokemon as a naughty panda? Seeing Serena's adorable expression, Air couldn't help but want to tease her. Ah, naughty panda. Serena felt so ashamed that she wished she could find a crack in the ground to crawl into. But driven by her position and curiosity, Serena suppressed her shyness and pulled out the Pokédex to examine it. Naughty panda, naughty panda. If an enemy looks down upon them, they'll try their best to glare back. But the effect is very weak. The Pokédex's electronic mecha chimed. Oh, it really is. This child is really called Naughty Panda. At this moment, Xiaoxu's little head leaned over, looking at the information about Naughty Panda. Of course I know that, I just forgot. Serena maintained her pride. But this time, she didn't run away out of shyness. Instead, she joined the other two girls and gathered around Naughty Panda. The Pokemon also gathered together, but perhaps because of the crowding or perhaps because they were tired from playing, Some Pokémon simply fell asleep in the grass nearby. Others continued to follow the three girls, watching Naughty Panda. After all, Naughty Panda's origins were truly unreliable, and it was normal to be a little wary. This meant that, aside from the Pokémon originally accompanying the three girls, Gyarados and Suicune, the two most powerful creatures in the camp, also gathered around their beloved son and daughter. After all, their master had left, yet they felt a responsibility to protect the three girls. Meanwhile, Yu said he hadn't noticed that even after he had completely departed, the members of Organization S remained where they were, daring not to make a single move. Holding torches, they peered around with vigilance and fear, fearing that Yu, the evil spirit, would suddenly appear again. Team leader, are you okay? We didn't catch that Pokémon, and we got beaten up anyway. How are we going to report back? Yet, if we don't complete our mission, we'll definitely be punished. Several members close to the team leader helped him, who still smelled of burnt flesh, to his feet and gathered around him, engaging in a lively discussion. However, the team leader, at this moment, was in no mood to pay attention. He was simply in pain, and nothing else. He grimaced for a moment. Although he hated it, he had to face the reality of what was about to happen. Just as his teammate had said, his mission hadn't been completed. It involved the organization's secrets. And he had actually messed it up like this. He probably expected a very, very bad fate. However, the team leader wasn't going to give up and began racking his brains for a way to escape. Chapter 435 Shinosuke. S's. Just as the group gathered to discuss their next battle plan, another dark shadow approached. This one, however, was even more unusual than the previous ones. It could be said to have appeared out of thin air. While Yu's form was at least traceable, this one was truly invisible. Even the word nothingness wouldn't be an exaggeration. Beside this shadow, a ghostly figure hovered around it. Any Pokémon trainer skilled in Ghost-type Pokémon would have recognized it as Gengar, the most common Ghost-type Pokémon. Gengar is renowned not only for its powerful strength but also for its elusive, ghostly movements, which strike fear into the hearts of countless people. Now, under the cover of darkness, Gengar's form became even more elusive. All that could be seen was a figure, with a shadow flickering around it. Haha, you're a bunch of losers. You can't even complete a simple capture mission, and now you're cowering here in fear. Do you really think our organization would keep idle people? The ghostly voice and the sudden appearance of the photo album in everyone's ears made them break out in a cold sweat and tremble uncontrollably. This wasn't just the situation with the group, but also with the members of the organization, and even the Pokémon that hadn't been recovered. Some Pokémon were even prostrating themselves on the ground, trembling in fear. It was like a mouse encountering a cat, encountering a being infinitely more powerful than itself, only to be forced to speak like this. And as the words rang out, everyone present immediately knelt on one knee without hesitation, bowing their heads deeply, as if they didn't want to be discovered or seen. A figure gradually emerged from the shadows, the moonlight casting a clear light, revealing the newcomer's face. It was like a man dressed in nightgown, dressed like an ancient theorist, toying with a tiny, inky black knife. If his entire life had been filled with a gloomy aura, each step would have brought a sense of oppression. Now, it felt incredibly oppressive, and uncomfortably uncomfortable. Especially when coupled with Gengar's sinister, wicked laugh, which occasionally appeared from his surroundings, the atmosphere seemed even more eerie and terrifying in this dark atmosphere. A weaker person would have likely had a heart attack from such a fright. Greetings, Captain Shinosuke, a unified roar echoed, now full of momentum. The previous era of stagnation was completely gone. The man who arrived was none other than Shinosuke, one of the 8 captains of Organization S, specializing in ghost-type Pokémon. HMPH. What's your use? You can't even handle a small matter, and yet you still need me to appear? You know, a powerful character like me usually appears much later, and you're using me to appear early just because of me. Shinosuke's voice rang out, devoid of any emotion. Captain, it's not that we're not trying hard, sir, it's just that the enemy is too strong. As the highest-ranking team leader, he was reluctant to show his face before the captain, but at this moment, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. Then, with a nervous heart, he recounted the entire story. Of course, he wouldn't reveal any details about the S organization, and it seemed he was exaggerating. He talked about how brutal Yu was, how powerful Pikachu and Charmeleon were, and basically started to shift the blame from the team leader to the present. Shinjiro had listened quietly without saying a word. His face was covered by a black scarf, making it impossible to see his expression. After finishing his recounting, Shinjiro remained silent, standing there. Naturally, the minions, at the lowest level of the organization, didn't dare to speak either, remaining on one knee, their heads bowed. Facing the once deep silence, Shinjiro only replayed in his mind the mission his boss had given him before his departure. Lately, for unknown reasons, the Pokémon League has been keeping a close eye on the S organization, the main organization. As a result, many of our plans have been disrupted, and even numerous missions have been sabotaged. This has caused heavy losses to our main organization, forcing us to remain low-key for the time being. But this isn't enough. We still have some critical research underway, and we absolutely cannot let the Pokémon League disrupt us. Therefore, after you complete this tracking mission, go to the Anti-Alliance to help Fushimi Tsukasa. What we need most right now is time, and the Anti-Alliance, our branch organization, can help us draw the Pokémon League's attention. The bigger the noise, the better, so they can temporarily ignore our main organization's affairs. At the same time, if the main organization's affairs can be kept under wraps for the time being, it's best to avoid exposing them. Shinjiro looked at the group of people in front of him, his mind full of his future tasks, hoping to find a win-win solution to calm the matter down. Chapter 436 Jengar. This is a bit of a dilemma. But if the other party could actually mention Fushimi Tsukasa and Kanglang's names, then he's no ordinary person, and his strength should be quite high. We need to think this over carefully, though the darkness and the mask obscured Shinosuke's expression, his soft muttering made it impossible to see him, but from the tone of his voice, one could sense that his brow was furrowed. Jenghost at this moment, in the pouring moonlight, Shinosuke's shadow stretched out very long. A closer look would have been shocking. Shinosuke didn't move at all, but his shadow on the ground twisted in an eerie manner. The originally narrow shadow began to widen. Furthermore, a pair of new red eyes appeared within the pitch-black shadow, and a pure laugh rang out. Hearing this, the members of Organization S shuddered even more, and each of them trembled to varying degrees. It wasn't just them, the Pokémon were like this, too. Even the powerful Blue King was now acting like a dogged Pokémon, barely stopping to stick out its tongue and wag its tail. Faced with this universally fearful emotion, Shinjiro seemed deeply annoyed. He whispered, "Jengar, be quiet. You're disturbing my thoughts." The voice of Shinjiro, one of the 8 captains of Organization S, echoed through the dark, silent forest. The minions trembled even more, and Jin and Yuo was terrified. This was a powerful figure they didn't normally interact with, and his tone was clearly furious. How could this be tolerated? However, despite these words that shook countless minions, it seemed to have no effect on Jengar. The sinister laughter continued, and even the figure of the Ghost Master gradually emerged from the shadows on the ground. All right, be quiet. We're dealing with serious business now," Shinosuke scolded again, and then he stopped caring about Jengar. Looking at the group of people kneeling in front of him, he pondered for a moment and then continued, "Let's just leave it at that. You can leave now, and I'll take care of the follow-up matters. Remember, your mission this time must not be known to anyone other than you." Shinosuke immediately issued a gag order. After all, this was also an important research project in his headquarters. And these minions were too weak to begin with, so Shinosuke was not very reassured. However, despite saying so, Shinosuke had no intention of pursuing the matter. Firstly, it was because it would be too troublesome to investigate the matter further. Although these things were just trivial matters for the S organization, it was a turbulent time. Secondly, of course, he was afraid the situation would become too drastic, ultimately drawing the attention of the Pokémon League once again. After all, their boss's mission this time was to divert their attention to the Anti-Alliance, thereby giving the main group a chance to develop. Furthermore, it was just a Pokémon needed for an experiment. Their research institute had plenty of such creatures, so it was merely an insignificant Pokémon. Furthermore, as far as he knew, the Pokémon that had escaped hadn't yet been transformed, so he wasn't worried about it leaking information or secrets. His most important priority now was to calm the situation. If necessary, he even had to warn the young man who had been obstructing them. As for why he didn't use his immense power to quietly eliminate his perceived enemy, it was because, while they were an evil organization, arguably the largest in the world, killing someone was no small matter. After all, unlike Pokémon, Everyone was registered with a Pokémon League. Pokémon, however, were different. After all, aside from those cultivated by humans, there were countless Pokémon registered in wild areas, and there were countless completely wild Pokémon. Therefore, to him, they were just Pokémon. He could calmly face their fate, let alone a Pokémon that had escaped and was completely worthless. This might seem cold-blooded, but strangely enough, within evil organizations, when the power and status reached a certain level, they would no longer be cold-blooded towards Pokémon, but would actually treat them with genuine affection. Perhaps this could fill the initial emptiness in their hearts and warm the hearts of those in high positions. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the scene where Shinjiro scolded Jengar just now. Although he was a little annoyed that Jengar had interrupted his thoughts, his attitude towards his own Pokémon was still quite gentle. Didn't you see the look of fear mixed with a hint of envy on the faces of the other minions and their Pokémon? It seemed that Shinisuke's scolding had no effect. Far from stopping, Jengar only intensified. This also demonstrated just how mischievous this Jengar was. It was rare for such a mischievous Jengar to show its true nature, completely unmoved by its master being a high-ranking official in an evil organization. Shinisuke's veins throbbed as he swatted Jengar away again. If it weren't for his subordinates, he would have rushed over to confront Jengar. Alright, stop messing around. I have a mission for you. Find anyone nearby. If you find any, test their strength and see if they're any danger. Shinisuke spoke the thought he'd been thinking about for a while, and without even considering Jengar's agreement, he gave the order. Jengar, at this moment, was quite respectful of his master. After another laugh, he dove back into the shadows. Then, Shinji's shadow twisted strangely, and then separated into two shadows. One shadow flew away at a rapid speed, like a sharp-toothed shark in the water, and soon disappeared into the darkness. Chapter 437 Gift. Meanwhile, just as Shinjiro sent out his Jengar to investigate, Yu had already rushed back to camp with Pikachu and Charmeleon. As they left, he seemed to be thinking that the enemy wouldn't give up, and might send even more powerful forces to pursue them, or even cause more trouble. Yu couldn't help but feel even more anxious. After fully confirming that the enemy group hadn't deceived him, Yu rushed back at full speed with Pikachu and Charmeleon. After all, although he had left Gyarados and Suicune, two Pokémon at the level of Quasi-King, at the camp for protection, he still felt uneasy. After all, he had already fought against the S organization more than once, and naturally knew that while their minions were vulnerable, their senior and mid-level officials were not. Therefore, Yu feared that if he left for too long, the enemy would use a diversionary tactic or lure the enemy away, and then he would be left with nowhere to cry. But when Yu returned to camp with Pikachu and Charmeleon, he had a different feeling. He was completely overthinking things. How could he be worried about this situation? It felt like a bustling market. Looking at the bonfire surrounded by the three women and their Pokémon, and then looking at the Pokémon dancing around it, it was like a bonfire party. And what about that petite figure that stood out the most? Why did it look so familiar? Could it be a wild Pokémon that had appeared from nowhere and was playing with Suicune and the others? Or maybe one of Serena and the other two had captured a new companion. But if it was a new companion, this rate was incredibly high. Normally, if the three of them could capture a Pokémon in a day, it would be quite impressive. Yu couldn't be blamed for thinking so. After all this journey. They rarely caught Pokémon, but for a novice trainer, they would have caught at least 90, if not 100. Of course, Yu was a rather unique figure, but Serena and the other two were a bit more fascinated. With speculations swirling around him, Yu gradually approached the three women. Perhaps because of the bustle, or perhaps because they were also engrossed in the action, the three women hadn't noticed Yu had returned with Pikachu and Charmeleon. They were still immersed in the unique performances of the Pokémon. Serena and Air, for example, were both accomplished Pokémon performers themselves. They certainly wouldn't miss such a great opportunity to learn from the many Pokémon's unique performances. Xiaoxia was completely captivated by the different Pokémon's unique performances, and after seeing her two Pokémon let loose among the crowd, she became even more captivated. Gyarados and Suicune, two of the strongest Pokémon, noticed Yu, Pikachu, and Charmeleon. However, upon seeing them, neither Pokémon made a sound. Instead, they seemed to completely let themselves go, completely immersing themselves in their own performances. While it was a performance, it was simply a gathering of Pokémon, twirling their bodies freely or performing what they considered their most dazzling dances. Normally, Yu's Pokemon would have preferred special training to spare the extra time for dancing. However, because Yu was giving them a day off tonight, and because they were all very happy, they all joined in the fun. Tiptoeing to the side of the three women, Yu noticed that they hadn't noticed him yet, and he couldn't help but feel a prank. Since the three women were sitting separately, Yu was alone and couldn't handle everything, so he quickly set his sights. Serena seemed incredibly excited. It couldn't be helped, because the Pokemon were so good at performing against each other that she seemed to have discovered some strategies and special tricks for the upcoming competition. After noticing this, Yu either sent Pichu and Charmeleon away, or had them join the new team. Then, on tiptoe, he quietly approached Serena and quietly extended his demonic hand. Watching the Pokemon's performances, especially her own Charmeleon and Eevee, inspired by her earlier experience, Serena had them practice. Serena was completely absorbed, comparing the performances before her with her own imagined ones. However, Serena, still engrossed in the Pokemon's performance, suddenly felt her vision go black, and then she could see nothing. This sudden change startled Serena, completely unaware of Yu's demonic hand blocking her view. She instinctively cried out, "Ah! What's going on? Why did it suddenly go dark?" Puff! Serena's exclamation quickly caught the attention of Xiaoxia and Air, who couldn't help but laugh at Serena's somewhat comical moment. Soon, the commotion also attracted the attention of the Pokemon, and the previously lively scene suddenly quieted down. However, as if to amuse Serena, neither the three girls nor the Pokemon made a sound. Air and Xiaoxia simply wanted to see Serena embarrass herself, while the Pokemon were completely curious. After another moment of panic confusion, Serena finally realized what was happening. Once she realized what was happening, her mind became much more alert. After a moment's hesitation, she sensed a familiar sensation in her eyes and instantly revealed the owner of the demonic hand. "Yu, I know it's you. Let go." Once her vision returned, Serena was delighted to see Yu, then couldn't help but grumble, "Yu, you're so annoying. You're teasing me again and making me look bad." HMPH, "I'm ignoring you." Serena's adorable expression made her say, "Come and comfort me, or I'll just ignore you." Yu was laughing in his heart, but he also quickly begged for mercy. Okay, it's my fault. To express my deep apology, I will give you a gift. Please subscribe, please collect, please recommend, please comment, please give me a 5-star rating, please." Chapter 438 Birthday. Looking at the gift Yu had taken from his storage ring, Serena, oblivious to Yu's smile, quickly glanced curiously at the gift in his hand. Yu held a Pokemon with yellow fur, long ears tipped with black, a small mouth, and black eyes. 2 round, red electric sacs were visible on its cheeks. The three girls, already accustomed to seeing this Pokemon, instantly recognized the Pokemon. If it wasn't our Pikachu, who else could it be, the team's adorable pet? Of course, this wasn't a real Pikachu. It was just a Pokemon doll with a similar size. "Yu, what's this?" Serena asked, puzzled, not understanding why Yu suddenly offered her a gift. If it was an apology for his behavior, that wasn't the point. After all, given their relationship, such playful behavior was commonplace. Yu smiled faintly, looking at Serena's somewhat bewildered face. Suddenly, he reached out his left hand and gently pinched Serena's perky nose. Feeling the gentle yet gentle hand playing tricks on her nose, Serena blushed again. Her beautiful eyes flickered, and she barely dared to look Yu in the eye. Seeing Serena's shy expression, Yu smiled again. This time, before anyone could ask, Yu immediately said, "Happy birthday, Serena. This is my birthday present for you. I'm not sure what you like, but I've seen you girls like these dolls, so I bought you one while I was in Aromatherapy City." At this point, Yu felt a little embarrassed, and his fair, handsome face flushed slightly. Yu recalled the time he'd rushed into the doll store to buy a Pikachu doll. The looks he received from the staff and the girls browsing the dolls utterly mortified even the thick-skinned Yu. After all, in this world, aside from women's intimate apparel and personal items, Pokemon dolls and perfume were synonymous with femininity. Boys might play with dolls, but that was mostly in childhood, and you were only a minority. Wow, what a cute doll. This doll actually looks like Pikachu. So furry and adorable. Serena hadn't even come to her senses when Air and Xiaoxu were already captivated by the Pikachu doll in Yiyu's hands. Hey! It's my birthday. Serena hadn't even grasped the idea yet. She blinked at the Pikachu doll Xiaoxu and Air had snatched away. Yes, today is your birthday. You didn't forget, did you? Yiyu nodded as if it was a matter of course. Actually, Yiyu had just happened to remember that today was Serena's birthday. This so-called Pikachu doll was a prize he had won from a long ago Pokemon battle event. The prizes at the time were incredibly diverse, not to mention the other prizes. The Pokemon dolls alone were incredibly diverse. With Yiyu's skill, he naturally won first place. The prizes were naturally generous, allowing the winner to choose a set of specially crafted collectible Pokemon dolls. So, as a battle enthusiast, when faced with choosing a girl's doll, Yiyu hesitated for a long time, just as he had imagined, and was almost kicked out by the staff. He was simply too hesitant. He looked at this and that, insisting on picking the best one, but he wasn't a girl. In the end, he could only choose a set that included his Pokemon doll. My birthday. Serena was still a little confused, because her mother usually arranged everything for her birthday back home. You really forgot your birthday? Yiyu grumbled, as if he'd rather express his feelings. Yiyu pinched Serena's perky nose and deliberately shook it from side to side. Serena hummed, and the shyness on her face faded a bit, replaced by a hint of sweetness. Yiyu actually remembered her birthday. So happy, so happy. This was Serena's truest thought at the moment. If it weren't for the two big lights, Air and Xiaoxu, Serena would have rushed over to kiss Yiyu, and then a series of unspeakable things would have begun. At this thought, Serena's cheeks flushed again, and she quickly covered her face with her hands, as if trying to cover her ears and steal the bell. But perhaps it was because she was too excited, or perhaps because she was too shy after thinking about something. Serena's head was actually steaming, though it wasn't very clear. But it seemed to affect her thinking again, and she asked a little confusedly, "But how did you know my birthday, Serena? You forgot, when you went to Professor Oak's training camp, your birthday happened to be during that time. Didn't I celebrate your birthday then?" "Oh, it seems you did. Someone really embarrassed themselves at my birthday party." Serena suppressed her embarrassment and looked at Yiyu with a smile on her face. Yiyu choked, looking at Serena's smirk. It seemed like she was just trying to trick him. Because it was his first time meeting Serena, and she was a girl other than his senior sister Anzuner. Therefore, he had no experience with girls, and when he was with Serena and Xiaoguang during the summer camp, he made a lot of fools of himself. On Serena's birthday, everyone else said they'd given her toys that girls would like. Even Professor Oak said he'd given her a very memorable Pokeball. But when it came to Yiyu's birthday, he gave Serena an exquisite soft sword. That had terrified everyone, and Serena, the birthday girl, looked like she was about to cry. Yiyu was so lost in thought that he didn't want to recall it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 Black Shadow. Hey! Today's Serena's birthday. Listening to the conversation between the two, Xiaoxu and Air realized that if they didn't react now, their achievements would be lost. Yet, since it's Serena's birthday, why didn't you tell us? We can all celebrate together. You really don't consider us friends, do you? Air chimed in, feigning anger. Well, Serena scratched her head awkwardly, trying to explain. But before she could get a word out, Yiyu interrupted her. It's not that she won't tell me. It's that Serena simply forgot when her birthday is. Yiyu didn't hesitate to interrupt, even pretending not to notice Serena's angry glare. Yiyu, you're so annoying. I'm ignoring you. Serena stamped her foot in dissatisfaction. Then, whether truly angry or not, she turned and walked towards the naughty panda. At this moment, Naughty Panda finally woke from his coma, having only choked on a few mouthfuls of water. Most Pokemon can swim, though it's not an innate skill, it's something they learn. However, just like humans, some Pokemon can't swim, and unfortunately, this Naughty Panda happened to be one of them. Now awake, Naughty Panda had completely lost his initial shyness. In just a short while, he'd become friendly with all the Pokemon present. It's true that Naughty Panda lived up to his name, having been incredibly lively and active for just a moment. Perhaps because he was still a little hazy after being rescued, Naughty Panda had a good impression of Serena and felt close to her. Upon seeing Serena arrive, Naughty Panda threw himself into her arms, vying with Charmeleon and Eevee for attention. For a moment, laughter and joy filled the air. Hey, you, since you knew that today was Serena's birthday, why didn't you tell us in advance? So that we can prepare it later, Air complained to Yu. Xiaoxu also looked a little worried. Looking at Serena, who was playing with Pokemon not far away, she felt a little embarrassed. Yu rubbed his nose awkwardly. He didn't know what to say for a moment. He couldn't say that he just thought of it suddenly. But as the two girls said before, since today is Serena's birthday, they can't not prepare anything. Oh. What else can we do now? The meal is over. Do we have to start preparing supper at this time? Yu was very distressed, but when it came to eating, he couldn't help swallowing. Eat, you only know how to eat. Air rolled his eyes in annoyance. By the way, it's still early, why don't we have a birthday party, now, why not? I think Xiaoxu's idea is pretty good. Aren't there still 3.5 hours until the next day? That's plenty. Air seemed very excited, her eyes brightening the more she spoke. Although Air's family background meant she had attended all sorts of birthday parties, and even her past birthday parties, while not particularly grand, were certainly quite lavish. But this time was different, she was hosting a birthday for her travel companion. Oh. Starting now? That sounds good. Yu was also looking forward to it. But then again, Yu, when is your birthday? We don't even know. Xiaoxu's eyes were filled with curiosity. My birthday? The sudden question completely stunned Yu. But it didn't matter. Yu began to think seriously. After a long pause, a hint of embarrassment crept into his voice, his tone thick with guilt. I think I've forgotten. It seems I haven't celebrated my birthday in ages, but at that moment, a subtle flicker of dejection crossed Yu's face. Two exclamations rang out simultaneously. Air and Xiaoxu couldn't believe their ears. What kind of people were there today? They'd forgotten their birthdays one after another. However, Air and Xiaoxu silently took Yu's words to heart. Girls, in particular, are known for their subtlety. Though Yu's expression was fleeting, both girls caught it. As if to prevent Yu from recalling any unpleasant memories, Air changed the subject, saying, Yu, I'm curious. Why do you forget your birthday so often, but you remember Serena's so clearly? He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when Air said this, Yu felt a sour taste in his mouth. Serena, who was playing with a Pokemon not far away, appeared to be playing with them, but her occasional glances betrayed her. Especially after hearing Air's question, she appeared annoyed at the Pokemon's interaction, but in reality, she was holding her breath, her ears perked up. Well, there's a reason for that, isn't there? Yu replied without giving it much thought, after a moment's pause. What's the reason? Air's beautiful eyebrows raised, and a charming smile curved the corners of his mouth. Even Xiaoxu watched with curiosity, her heart involuntarily rising. Meanwhile, while Sunli waited for Yu's answer, they hadn't noticed that, not far away, in the moonlight, a shadow of an unknown figure was clinging to the grass, approaching at a rapid speed. Perhaps due to the sheer number of people on Yu's side, the shadow stopped 100 meters from Yu's camp. Of course, the shadow wasn't content with just that. While no longer advancing, it twisted strangely in place. Even Yu, with his keen senses, didn't notice this at all, remaining immersed in his conversation with the three women. Chapter 440 Become Stronger? Darkness is ultimately the best cover for everything, especially for those in dark situations, perhaps even their best protection. Leveraging the cover of darkness, coupled with the ghost-type Pokemon's inherently elusive presence and absence, Jengar's movements remain completely unpredictable. After extensive searches, Jengar finally managed to quietly observe everyone and every Pokemon in the camp, completely undetected by Yu. That shadowy figure was none other than Jengar, sent by Shinjiro to scout out the situation and spy on the enemy. Upon arriving, Jengar had lost his usual swagger, acting like a killer lurking in the darkness, his eyes curiously observing the bustling scene ahead. Thus, completely concealed, even Yu, the warrior, was unaware of Jengar's arrival. He continued to chat and laugh with Air and Xiaoxu. However, Yu's situation was perhaps a bit precarious. Faced with Air's seemingly tricky question, Yu was completely speechless. What could he say? Should he tell them that it was because the prisoner he'd escaped at his birthday party was so deeply engraved in his memory? So much so that he'd even memorized the date, a memory he'd never forgotten. Seeing Xiaoxu and Air's expectant expressions, Yu couldn't help but twitch his lips. Hey, there's more. Serena, what's with that expression again? But being met with such a slight anticipation from the three women made Yu's heart tremble. He only managed to resist for a moment before giving in. Then, still suppressing his embarrassment, he recounted the entire story. After he'd finished recounting the entire story, Air and Xiaoxu exchanged bewildered glances. And then, as Yu had expected, they both covered their mouths and giggled. Serena's cheeks flushed once more, whether from shyness or perhaps anger at Yu's response. Serena, though still playing with a Pokémon, had a slightly puffed-up cheek and was mumbling to herself. Firefox and Eevee were completely bewildered, but that didn't stop the playful panda from continuing to compete for a favor. Soga, so that's how it is, Air suddenly realized, and her nervous heart involuntarily relaxed. Xiaoxu couldn't help but pat her chest, feeling relieved. When she caught a glimpse of Air and Xiaoxu's subtle movements from the corner of her eye, Serena sighed helplessly and pouted. But there really was nothing she could do. After all, flowers have their wills, but flowing water is ruthless, and there's nothing she can do about it. Thinking of this, Serena sighed softly, and suddenly felt that she had lost all interest in playing with a Pokémon. Since there's still time, let's get ready. Let Serena have an unforgettable birthday. Air felt refreshed at the moment, and even more motivated to plan Serena's birthday. Okay, so what should we do next? Just give me the order, and even if it costs me my life, I'll definitely help you with everything. Yu patted his chest, putting on a brave face. PFFT, okay, don't be so nervous. It's not like I'm going to make you go through fire and water, Air grumbled, rolling her eyes at Yu. Well, since this is a last-minute birthday party, we should mobilize all our resources. Not just us, but the Pokémon too. This should make it go faster, Xiaoxu suggested, her beautiful eyes glancing at the Pokémon still frolicking nearby. Haha, that's a great suggestion, Xiaoxu. Since those guys don't have special training today, why not let them have it easy? Yu's eyes lit up, and he didn't hold back on his praise. Could it be that the Pokémon at this moment hadn't noticed that someone was flashing them a devilish, malicious smile? Unbeknownst to Yu, in the shadows, a pair of crimson eyes stared eerily at them, a sinister grin spreading across their faces. From a small, shadowy space, hidden from Yu and the others, a sinister laugh emanated. Pikachu and Charmeleon, having returned, immediately joined the Pokémon's merriment. Charmeleon, in particular, was usually reserved, but after following Yu's outing today, he had become much more cheerful, even boasting to the other Pokémon. Perhaps because the content was so exciting, many Pokémon gathered around them. The less powerful Pokémon, in particular, were fascinated by the news. Charmeleon, likewise, thoroughly enjoyed the envious glances from the other Pokémon. He finally understood why Pikachu had always loved to show off in front of him. Hey, what are you guys talking about? You look so happy. Thinking of his own little plan, Yu squeezed his way out from the crowd of Pokémon gathered around him. Then, as Charmeleon stared in astonishment and the other Pokémon stared in bewilderment, he approached Charmeleon and said in an indescribable tone, Charmeleon, what do you think? Do you still want to get stronger? Do you want to take on multiple people like you did tonight? Or even surpass that Pikachu guy? At this moment, although Yu's target was a Pokémon, he acted like a Pokémon dealer trying to abduct a Pokémon. However, faced with Yu's promise of profit, Charmeleon's eyes were filled with desire, practically drooling. This wasn't limited to Charmeleon, with the exception of the newly hatched Snorlax. Almost everyone, from Suicune to Buzzbit, could resist the temptation of becoming stronger. Of course, there was one exception, our Pikachu. Perhaps it was the sheer bustle of activity that drew Pikachu's attention. After hearing Yu's words, Pikachu's expression gradually shifted from curiosity to a blank expression, as if he knew nothing. He walked away silently, as if he didn't want to stay here any longer and was planning to leave. But what was going on with that pouty little mouth and quickened pace? Chapter 441, Bluff. Of course, Yu didn't notice Pikachu's little gesture. His entire focus was on how to persuade his Pokémon. After all, he was asking them to work for free, especially since he'd declared it a day off. He felt a little embarrassed to say it out loud. So, he had to resort to a roundabout way, getting his Pokémon to willingly join in the labor. After all, as the saying goes, labor is the most glorious, and at that moment, the Pokémon were perfectly cooperative, their faces beaming with excitement, as if they could imagine the grandeur they would command once they became stronger. Have you thought it through? If we miss this opportunity today, there won't be another chance. After all, this method is best suited for this evening, Yu continued, launching into his deceptive tactics. Normally, if a trainer wanted their Pokémon to do something, they could simply convince the most prestigious of them first, then let them lead the charge. But how could he put it? Pikachu and Yu have been together for so long. While they haven't reached a level of true rapport, they're familiar with each other. To put it bluntly, as soon as one raises their bet, the other knows they're ready to pee or have sex. This is why, upon hearing Yu's words and seeing his signature expression, Pikachu quickly fled. Charmeleon and Suicune, however, were unaware of this. While these Pokémon have been following Yu's gaze for some time, Suicune in particular has been following him almost at the same time as Pikachu. However, due to their later hatching, the level of rapport between Suicune and Yu remains far superior to that between Yu and Pikachu. While Suicune and Yu are rapidly developing a bond and strengthening their affection, that takes time, at most, several years, at least a year. Therefore, it can be said that, with the exception of Pikachu, they are still quite close. Almost no other Pokémon knew Yu's true intentions. Of course, even if they knew later, it would probably be useless. You ask why Pikachu didn't remind them? Isn't that nonsense? Yu was fooling around over there, and if he insisted on interfering, it would be like walking into a trap. He would also be dragged into the labor army. Instead of everyone working together, why don't you all work while I sit in the front row of the bench? Pikachu smirked in his heart, not worrying that Yu would turn around and force himself after fooling Charmeleon and the others. Although he seemed to have felt that this was enough, Yu still felt uneasy, so he decided to add a little more excitement. Yak, I've decided. If Sui performs the hardest and most diligently this time, then he'll definitely get a spot on the next gym battle, or in some other major tournament. Yu had undoubtedly grasped the weaknesses of all his Pokémon. After all, this was a Pokémon battle, and not just any ordinary one, it was a prestigious one. The ones they faced were no longer just small-time foes, but true duels with masters, battles with Pokémon of similar strength. Don't look at Yu. Throughout his journey, he had encountered countless opponents in countless Pokémon battles. But which of them were truly outstanding? Aside from the gym battles, there were only battles with strong rivals or encounters with powerful foes. Rarely, those battles weren't even that. A small, casual street fight like that. It's not to say it's rare, but it's certainly incredibly rare. After all, how many powerful enemies can one encounter in a lifetime? And how many truly formidable ones can one encounter? Pokémon gym battles are certainly possible, but that only works if your strength is similar. If the difference is too great, you'll be crushed. But if it's too high, it's boring. Perhaps this doesn't matter to other Pokémon, but for a Pokémon deeply influenced by Yu's battle-crazed personality, that's exactly what they think. Yet, I have to fight for my own happiness. I don't want to sit on the sidelines. After all, while Yu has a small number of Pokémon, there aren't many good matches to show for it. And besides, the Master said before that if you perform well, there's a chance. This is a great opportunity for weaker Pokémon. Otherwise, whenever Yu encountered a proper battle like this, the Pokémon he would send out would almost always be either Pikachu or Gyarados, two powerful and fixed Pokémon. People are always dissatisfied, and this applies not only to humans but also to Pokémon. Although he knew that if Yu fought, he would send out these powerful main forces, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Aside from the weaker ones, the others like Gyarados, Pikachu, Charmeleon, and Suicune were all competitors. So, at this moment, even though he knew it was Yu's conspiracy, Pikachu couldn't resist the temptation and ran back. Just like the other Pokémon nearby, they all looked at Yu with eagerness. He hoped that when the time came, he would give them a 5-star rating. Xiaoxu, watching from a distance, looked at Air with some confusion and asked, what's Yu doing? Why do Pikachu and the others seem so excited? Too excited to hear Xiaoxu's words, the Pikachus wouldn't have cried out in excitement. How could they not be excited? Their futures depended on it. Only by constantly battling masters could they grow stronger, rather than constantly bullying the weaker ones. Who knows, one day, they might end up being bullied themselves. Air was puzzled, truly baffled by the relationship between master and servant. He shrugged helplessly, indicating he had no idea. Air then went over the details with Xiaoxu again. After all, this birthday party was a bit rushed, and they had very little time to prepare. Chapter 442, Throwdown. Afterward, under Yu's deceptive tactics, every Pokemon was filled with excitement, their fighting spirit high. If one didn't know better, one would have thought Yu was once again about to lead his Pokemon to a hearty brawl. Very good, that's the energy. Everyone, keep it up. Yu continued to drum up excitement while giving Pikachu and the others some instructions. Now, only after Xiaoxu and Air finished their discussion could Yu, the foreman, finally begin construction with his Pokemon. To maintain the Pokemon's enthusiasm, Yu continued his deceptive tactics. He had no choice, he didn't really want to do this, it was such a waste of time. But time was running out and a plan was needed. Unbeknownst to Yu, even as he was getting the Pokemon's spirits high, a pair of blood-red eyes, hidden in the darkness not far away, gazed at the excited Pokemon, a flicker of amusement and excitement in their eyes. That look was like one sizing up prey. If Pikachu or any of Yu's other Pokemon had seen it, they would surely have been familiar with it. This was the look they often gave other Pokemon, especially the look they displayed when encountering an interesting opponent. What kind of look was that? Beyond excitement, it was filled with excitement. Yu, it's alright. You can come over now. At this moment, Air and Xiaoxu had also hastily put together a plan. Okay, we'll be right there, Yu replied, then turned back to his Pokemon and began giving them instructions. After finishing his instructions, Yu led them directly to Air and the other two girls. Serena, why are you here too? Yu looked at Serena with some surprise. He had been so engrossed in his own deception that he hadn't noticed Serena's arrival. Why are you surprised? Can't I come? Serena smiled faintly, her tone tinged with a hint of ambiguity. How could that be? It's your birthday after all, but where's the little birthday girl? What's the matter with you joining in? Yu reacted quickly, scratching his hair awkwardly. Soon, all the Pokemon gathered, even the recently hatched Snorlax, who joined in. And today was a special day. It wasn't just Serena's birthday, it was Snorlax's, too. Though newly hatched, Snorlax's intelligence wasn't low, at least it wasn't completely clueless. Facing the joy of the surrounding Pokemon, it happily joined in. Perhaps because of their similar age, Snorlax had been following Buzzbot ever since hatching. That's why a smaller Pokemon is always followed by a Pokemon that's not many times larger. And most importantly, the following Pokemon acted even more like a younger brother. Ahem, Serena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was your birthday, so I didn't prepare anything, Air said to Serena beside her, a little embarrassed, as she began to decorate. It seemed Air's initiative gave the more introverted Xiaoxu some courage, and she followed suit, saying, me too. I'm so sorry, Serena. I'll definitely make it up next time. While conditions were limited, some formality was still necessary. At the very least, the venue needed to be decorated. After tying up a balloon she had just blown up, Serena paused after hearing the two women's slightly apologetic words and waved her hand nonchalantly. It's okay, it's okay. What's most important is that everyone's happy. It's great to have you all here to celebrate my birthday with me. I'm already very satisfied. Seeing the happy and satisfied smile on Serena's face, Air and Xiaoxu were about to say something else, but just then, a figure suddenly swooped down and tackled them to the ground. 3 subconscious screams pierced the dark sky, faintly audible even to the members of Organization S, who were preparing to evacuate the forest. Before Serena and the other two could recover, they felt their bodies lighten. Instead of the pain of hitting the ground, they felt themselves slammed into a warm embrace. But before they could bask in this warmth for long, a deafening explosion erupted right beside them. The explosion erupted right where Serena and the others had been standing. While its power and range were only comparable to that of a grenade, it was enough to send Serena into cold sweat and a wave of fear. If it hadn't been for Yu, they would have been either seriously injured or at least unconscious. Note, aside from warriors themselves, humans in the Pokemon world are generally very physically formidable, at least capable of withstanding the abilities and power unleashed by some Pokemon. Shaking his dizzy head, Yu looked at the three women he'd protected, still in shock and unable to recover. Upon discovering they were all alright, he breathed a sigh of relief. Subconsciously, he smoothed down each woman's disheveled hair. Even at that moment, Yu seemed to be staring at them with a sort of fixated gaze. However, with this perceptive sense of danger, he quickly recovered, not even bothering to help each woman to her feet. Under the blushing, tender gazes of the women, Yu quickly stood up, gave them a few simple instructions, and then quickly reunited with Pikachu and the other Pokémon. Because they were in a situation where the enemy was in the dark and he was in the light, he was very self-aware. After reuniting with the Pokémon, both Pikachu and the others in Yu's hands, as well as the Pokémon in the hands of the three women, loyally protected their trainers behind them. In order to protect all the trainers, the Pokémon formed a battle circle. Chapter 443, Alert. At this moment, at the camp where Yu and his companions were staying tonight, the once bustling scene had long since vanished, replaced by a tense, subdued atmosphere. But this atmosphere was instantly shattered by a single voice. Yu's voice echoed across the empty grassland, shrouded in darkness. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! All units, attention! All units, attention! I repeat, this is not a drill. This is not a drill. Though the word seemed somewhat comical at the moment, neither the sons and daughters nor the Pokémon present laughed out loud. Their expressions, like the previous atmosphere, were filled with tension and seriousness. The enemy was so well hidden. Therefore, facing this unknown enemy, the Pokémon were extremely self-aware, shielding their trainers behind them in a display of unwavering loyalty. Perhaps they had practiced this countless times before. Faced with this perilous situation, the Pokémon remained perfectly organized, showing no sign of panic. To truly ward off the enemy, the outermost layer of the circle was composed entirely of Yu's Pokémon. Pikachu, Gyarados, Suicune, and Charmeleon, four Pokémon that had reached the Quasi-King level, were particularly powerful. They served as the main force of the formation, stationed at the four crucial corners, east, west, south, and north. Elite-level Pokémon occupied the corners, while the next layer contained weaker Pokémon. The very center served as the center of the formation, where the trainers were stationed. From the moment of the explosion until now, only 2 or 3 minutes had passed. Trainers and Pokémon alike were in perfect harmony, and everything proceeded smoothly and methodically. Yu, now within the formation, nodded in satisfaction. If it weren't for the tense atmosphere, Yu would have burst into laughter at this very moment, shouting, "Who else, after all of this was his doing." Perhaps out of caution, what Yu considered a formation was actually something he had been experimenting with the three women and a host of Pokémon for a long time. He'd even rehearsed countless times to achieve the effect he'd just achieved. But as if to slap Yu in the face, two figures appeared panicked and frantic, darting about the field. "Snorlax, Panda! Hurry up and get in!" Serena shouted anxiously at the two Pokémon, their faces dazed. It couldn't be helped. One of them had joined later. The other had only just appeared. They had no idea how to use their formation, and hadn't even begun to adapt. And because all the Pokémon had been focused on the sneak-attacking enemy, preoccupied with setting up their own formations and protecting their masters, they'd completely forgotten about these two. This led to a very amusing scene. A simple circular formation, composed entirely of Pokémon, seemed meticulous and solemn, but two of them stood out in front, disrupting the atmosphere. Yu's mood was like a roller coaster, fluctuating between highs and lows. But he couldn't care less about the embarrassment of his opponent. After all, they were in a very dangerous situation. The enemy, lurking in the shadows, could attack again at any moment. And most importantly, their strength was unpredictable, which made them the most dangerous. It seemed that Serena's shouting had worked. Snorlax and Panda, who had been scurrying around outside the circle, calmed down involuntarily. While this only calmed them down and stopped them from scurrying, they were still outside the circle. If they were suddenly attacked, they would be too late to rescue. This wasn't about the Pokémon's speed, but about the enemy's unpredictable attack. Seeing the effect of their calls, Air and Xiaoxu quickly joined in, hoping to lure both Pokémon into the circle with their own calls. However, they had only just met today, and whether it was a lack of trust or some other concern, the three women kept calling out, but the two Pokémon stopped moving. Damn it! What have we been doing for the past 2 hours? If this goes on, we'll be too passive, like sitting ducks for them to play with. Yiyu's expression darkened as Serena and the other two shouted. Yiyu was also busy, scanning the surroundings, using the light from the campfire and the moonlight to thoroughly identify the enemy hidden in the darkness. To this end, Yiyu unleashed his warrior senses to the maximum, searching thoroughly to uncover every trace. But to no avail, he found no trace of the enemy. Although Yiyu hadn't located the enemy, for some unknown reason, the occulter hadn't taken advantage of Snorlax and Pandoriner's isolation to launch any attacks. Instead, everything was incredibly quiet, almost eerily so. It was a silence that completely overwhelmed Yiyu. However, he seized this opportunity and rushed out, reaching Snorlax and Pandoriner with lightning speed. He then lifted them up one by one and, before they could react, threw them into the circle, where they were cared for by Xiaoxia and the other two. Now that he was outside the circle, Yiyu had no intention of re-entering it. After all, he wasn't used to being protected. Unsure of the enemy's situation, Yiyu could only retrieve his Yageo spear from his stored ring. The snow-white Yageo spear gleamed in the moonlight, especially the bright silver tip, which gleamed with a cold gleam. Holding the Yageo spear upside down behind him, Yiyu was alert for the sneak attack that might come at any time, while at the same time shouting, trying to trick the enemy out of the shadows. Come out, who are you? If you have the guts, come out and fight me to the death. How can you be a hero if you sneak around? Come out. Chapter 444, Powerful Shadow Ball. Come out, who are you? If you dare, come out and fight me to the death. How can you be a hero sneaking around? Come out, Yiyu's roar echoed monotonously in the empty, silent night. As if to boost their master's morale, or perhaps to embolden their own group, the Pokémon followed suit. Pika Gyarados Liza Sui, the voices rose and fell, each one imbued with power, full of energy and yet intimidating. And as if to complement the Pokémon and Yiyu, as their shouts faded, the sinister laughter echoed once more. But for some reason, the playful tone of the voice was lost amidst this sinister laughter. Then, as if in retaliation for the sudden startle of the human and the Pokémon, shadow balls appeared out of thin air and flew towards them. Crucially, they had no way of using the direction of the shadow balls to locate the attacker, hiding in the shadows. At that moment, shadow balls, imbued with a dangerous aura, were appearing in all directions, centered around the Pokémon. This meant that with all the Pokémon gathered together, if a single individual were to face them, wouldn't all their escape routes be blocked? While this helped to distribute the pressure, the Pokémon were still left battered and utterly bewildered. Facing the shadow balls launched by an unknown Pokémon, Yiyu couldn't bring himself to resort to physical force. Firstly, not to mention the contract that instilled fear in every warrior. Secondly, he sensed a threatening, even fearful, aura from the shadow balls that were bearing down on him. Consequently, Yiyu abandoned his usual aggressive stance. After all, sometimes it's necessary to back down when necessary. So, with remarkable decisiveness, Yiyu flipped the Yageo spear in his hand and immediately stored it in his stored ring. His legs, already brimming with internal energy, stomped the ground repeatedly, moving away from his original position. Even so, Yiyu was in a precarious position. The moment his front foot left the ground, a shadow ball slammed into the air. The aftermath of the explosion, combined with his backward momentum, flung him directly into the swarm of Pokémon. Had Serena and the other two not been quick to catch Yiyu, he would have likely sustained minor injuries. Meanwhile, Snorlax and Panda Bear gradually calmed down under the comfort of the three women. Panda Bear, in particular, perhaps because Serena was the first person he saw after being rescued, had become extremely dependent on her. Furthermore, having already been through the previous series of pursuits, he was considered a Pokémon that had seen a lot of things, so Panda Bear managed to maintain his composure. As for the little Snorlax, while its intelligence was even better than that of the child, it was still a newly hatched Pokémon. After its initial panic, it strangely calmed down, its expression unperturbed, as if the crisis wasn't even here. Even without anyone or the Pokémon noticing, the little Snorlax actually took advantage of their inattention and extended its chubby paw to a leftover sandwich from tonight. Putting aside the question of what the others or the Pokémon would say if they noticed, simply because of the sheer danger, no one cared about it. Shadow balls were swarming from all directions, and after one struck Yiyu, they all seemed to receive a signal and unleashed a volley of thousands of bullets. However, despite being overwhelmed by the shadow ball's power and momentum, neither Pikachu nor Suicune, nor even the less powerful Crab and Buzzbit, showed any sign of retreat. Some were simply filled with excitement, the thrill of competing against true masters. After all, deeply influenced by Yu Yu's martial arts background, each Pokémon in his lap seemed to transform into a warrior. The path of martial arts is treacherous. Failure to advance is a recipe for regression. Only by constantly charging forward, overcoming numerous obstacles, can one ultimately reach the pinnacle. This was what Yu Yu's master, Zhao Kuang, had taught him. Similarly, this was what Yu Yu had passed down to his own Pokémon. Therefore, when faced with powerful Shadow Balls, Pikachu first, Crab next. Neither Pokémon held back or hesitated, unleashing their full might, unleashing their full power to the utmost. An electric ball, swirling with arcs, gathered momentum on Pikachu's tail, then, with a furious aura, was flung out by Pikachu, meeting the incoming Shadow Ball. On the other side, they faced the incoming Shadow Ball. Icy blue energy, imbued with a chilling aura, gathered in Suicune's mouth, as if only in this way could the power of his abilities reach maximum. Gyarados, on the other hand, displayed his true character to the fullest. Facing Shadow Ball, unlike Pikachu and Suicune, it unleashed its water cannon ability. A massive column of water blasted directly at the vastly smaller Shadow Ball, as if hoping to use the intense current to completely obliterate it. Charmeleon didn't possess any fire attribute special attacks, but it was no pushover. First, a vortex of flames, then a jet of flames shot straight at Shadow Ball. Simultaneously, both of its claws lost their emerald green glow. Clearly driven by caution, Charmeleon felt it wasn't enough to block his successive attacks, so he added another layer of defense, readying his Dragon Claws. After all, even if the Dragon Claw wasn't useful, it could still be used to support the rest of their team. Because their team's strength was so uneven, the only ones who could be considered the backbone were the four of them, who had reached the level of a Quasi-King. However, the less powerful Pokémon wouldn't sit still and wait for death. Instead, they unleashed their strongest abilities one by one to block the attack. Chapter 445, Sacrifice. Lightning Ball. Freeze Beam. Water Cannon. Flame Vortex. Flame Jet. These are the skills of the more powerful Pokémon, to be honest. Judging by the power they unleash, while slightly less powerful than the powerful Shadow Ball, they are still nothing to be underestimated. Meanwhile, the weaker Pokémon didn't have any special moves, but they nonetheless deployed their most powerful abilities. Take, for example, the shimmering bubbles of Bubble Beam from the Crawler. Faced with a powerful Shadow Ball, they seemed poised to burst and dissipate at any moment. Meanwhile, the Buzzerbat condensed wind blades from thin air, unconcerned about their effectiveness or whether they could withstand the Shadow Ball's attack. Its small, fleshy wings flapped continuously, unleashing air slash after air slash with such ferocity that it seemed as if the Shadow Ball could be sliced to pieces at any moment. At this moment, even Charmeleon and Foxy were using their skills, trying their best to assist. Perhaps due to their long journey with Yu Yu and the others, Foxy and Charmeleon had a slight confidence in their own strength. However, facing the Pokémon's confident attacks, they were ultimately disappointed. Against Shadow Ball, they were like an egg against a rock, but to say they had no effect at all was simply impossible. Although Shadow Ball's momentum continued to surge forward, its power was significantly diminished. This depended on the power of the skills used against the different levels of Pokémon. Among them, the skills unleashed by Pikachu and the other four Pokémon were the most powerful. Although the English Ball remained unblocked, the Shadow Ball's surface had dimmed considerably, becoming almost transparent and almost invisible. But Charmeleon and Foxy, and even Crab and Buzzbit, lacked such power. The skills they deployed to block the Shadow Ball seemed to have been completely wasted, for when they met the Shadow Balls, they barely paused, piercing their defenses. Excellent. Pikachu, use 100,000 volts next. Seeing his chance finally coming, Yu Yu quickly issued his orders. Suicune, Gyarados, use Water Cannon. Charmeleon, use Fire Vortex. Yu Yu's orders were all meant to be used as area of effect damage. At this moment, the likes of Crabbard hadn't reached the level of a Quasi-King, and this couldn't be relied upon. Forget about being a burden, let alone a helper. Therefore, Yu Yu decided to give it his all. From this simple Shadow Ball, he could tell that the enemy's strength was no less than that of Pikachu and the others, and by an unknown amount. And while the enemy was powerful, as the saying goes, 3 cobblers are better than 1. Furthermore, with 4 near-elite level Pokémon gathered together, as long as the opponent wasn't significantly stronger, they could at least hold their own. Therefore, after their single target attacks proved ineffective, and seeing that the current wave of Shadow Balls had already been significantly reduced, they decided to use a ranged attack to absorb the damage first. Suddenly, a scene of alternating lightning, fire, and water waves appeared on the battlefield. 100,000 volts was like a celestial justice. Bolts of lightning struck, transforming into indiscriminate damage, forming a small wall of lightning. Then came the water jets of the water cannon, interweaving in the air and blocking any that slipped through the lightning's net. Furthermore, the combination of water and lightning doubled the original power of the 100,000 volts. Finally, a wave of fire erupted, scorching the shadow balls in the alternating waves of water and fire. This seemingly flawless, perfectly coordinated skill combination seemed capable of completely eliminating all shadow balls. But something slipped through the net. A single shadow ball pierced through the 3 lines of defense formed by the 4 skills and blasted straight toward the Pokémon. Coincidentally, this elusive shadow ball struck the weaker Firefox. However, facing the approaching shadow ball, Firefox seemed frozen in fear. It stood still, staring intently with wide eyes as the shadow ball approached, completely damaging it. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. Firefox, facing this seemingly unavoidable shadow ball, seemed to have resigned itself to its fate. Its widened eyes gradually closed. Boom! After closing its eyes, Firefox felt only a deafening explosion echo in its ears, followed by gusts of wind blowing towards it. Hey, why isn't it hurting? This shouldn't be the case. Were those shadow balls you used earlier just to scare Pokémon? Just as Charmeleon was lost in thought, he heard the combined shouts of his master and several other trainers. Charmeleon, Charmeleon, how are you? Are you okay? Puzzled, he opened his eyes and saw Charmeleon lying on the floor, his body covered in wounds. The tall figure that had once stood beside him was now slumped in his master's arms. He looked so weak. While not completely incapacitated, he was almost there. It turned out that in that crucial moment, Charmeleon had stepped forward. Although he had been following Yuyu's orders, that didn't mean Yuyu could control his thoughts. Therefore, he wondered what kind of mindset he was maintaining. Charmeleon, following Yuyu's command to use Flame Vortex, still held on to the dragon claws it had initially deployed, a turquoise glow still covering its claws. And perhaps because of this, when facing the approaching Shadow Ball, Charmeleon had time to rescue. Although, facing the attack of Shadow Ball, at such a critical moment, Charmeleon did hesitate for a moment. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446, White Exchange. When faced with danger, the question of whether to think twice before acting, or to act completely without hesitation, is a common dilemma faced by both humans and Pokémon. After all, both humans and Pokémon are living beings, each with their own thoughts, feelings, and even selfish desires. To say that, when faced with danger, you simply rush forward without hesitation without a second thought would be a bit too hypocritical. Of course, there are exceptions. But at least in Yuyu's opinion, Charmeleon wouldn't be one of them. Facing the nearly threatening Shadow Ball, in that moment of heroically lunging forward, Charmeleon experienced a brief but deeply conflicted decision. After all, it was a powerful Shadow Ball. Losing your ability to fight was a minor issue, but losing a limb would be disastrous. However, despite a moment of internal turmoil, Charmeleon had already made up his mind. Especially after catching a glimpse of Serena and the other two, the nervous gaze of his master, and the resigned expression of Firefox, Charmeleon no longer cared. His only thought was protecting his companions. Charmander, follow me from now on. I'll make you incredibly strong and make your master regret it. How was your buffalo today, Charmander? Was it delicious? It's your fire-type Pokémon's favorite flavor, and Charmeleon and the others love it too. As if facing death, the past flashed through Charmander's mind like a movie. From his early days as a Charmander, taken in by his masters, to his current strength, and the recognition of so many caring companions, Charmander felt a sense of satisfaction. At the same time, his gaze became even more resolute, a piercing gaze that seemed to pierce Shadow Ball. Before anyone in the Pokémon could react, just as Shadow Ball was about to strike Charmeleon, Charmander swung out with his claws, which had been accumulating power for who knows how long. In that instant, The pitch-black night seemed to be ripped apart by these emerald-green claws. As if feeling that one dragon claw wasn't enough to withstand the remaining force of Shadow Ball, it unleashed another vortex of flames, enveloping its surroundings before lashing out with its other dragon claw. Crossing their claws, they swung simultaneously just as Shadow Ball neared. Facing the already weakened claws, which already gleamed with sharp intent, Shadow Ball seemed vulnerable, threatened to be cleaved in half at any moment. However, this was ultimately a fantasy. As Shadow Ball bombarded, the Dragon Claw, far from blasting the Shadow Ball to its death, actually accelerated its detonation. The aftermath of the explosion sent Charmeleon flying, but Yu, with his quick eyes and hands, caught it. Even so, Charmeleon was severely injured, practically unable to fight again. However, while Charmeleon was assisting Charmeleon in defending against the attack, several other Pokémon, working together, managed to block all of the Shadow Balls. This should have been a cause for celebration, but at this moment, neither Yu nor the Pokémon were happy. After all, let's not even mention the trouble this wave of Shadow Ball attacks had caused for everyone and their Pokémon. Even though they had parried the enemy's sudden attack, they still didn't know the true strength of the enemy lurking in the shadows. Even now, they hadn't even seen the attacker remained cloaked in darkness. And with just this seemingly simple wave of Shadow Ball attacks, Yu and his team had already lost a key member, Charmeleon. Considering that there were only 4 of them who could be considered high-level fighters at this point, the consequences of losing even one would be immeasurable. Furthermore, judging by the previous wave of Shadow Ball attacks, the attacker hiding in the darkness had come with ill intentions and was likely extremely powerful. After calming Charmeleon once more and handing it over to Serena and the other 2 girls, Yu turned his attention back to the upcoming battle, his face etched with seriousness. It was truly a double whammy. In just a few moments, he'd already lost a key member. And the saddest thing was, even with Charmeleon incapacitated, they still hadn't spotted the attacker. Damn it. This is truly abhorrent. This wave is a huge loss, Yu muttered, clearly upset at Charmeleon's sacrifice, but come to think of it, anyone would be upset. After all, one of his 4 strongest Pokémon had been half incapacitated for no apparent reason, before they'd even been able to perform their intended purpose. And it was a sacrifice that hadn't accomplished anything at all. It was a profound loss. But there was nothing he could do. After all, it was his own fault for being so inferior. Damn it. Who the hell is this? Come out now. If you have the guts, let's fight it out in the open. What's the point of sneaking around like this? Yu shouted in exasperation. As long as the enemy didn't reveal themselves, Yu couldn't relax for a moment. While he wasn't completely paralyzed, he still had to be constantly vigilant. Judging from the enemy's Shadow Ball attack just now, they were no joke. One misstep could cost them their lives. Meanwhile, despite appearing nervous and anxious, Yu mentally forced himself to calm down and think carefully. Firstly, due to its stats, Shadow Ball is a Ghost-type move. While there are other Pokémon that can use it, they aren't very many. Ghost-type Pokémon count, as do Psychic-type and Dark-type Pokémon. In other words, there are few Pokémon from all 3 types that can use Shadow Ball. But there's still a crucial clue, the enemy hasn't revealed themselves yet. Chapter 447 Defense. At this moment, although Yu's face still wore a tense and anxious expression, his heart was remarkably calm, as if he had completely forgotten all the events surrounding him. At this moment, Yu, like a famous detective from some distant time and space, began his brilliant deductions. As if to make matters more relevant, Yu subconsciously reached out and touched his chin. If it hadn't appeared from the beginning until now, then this Pokémon was extremely skilled at concealing itself. Alternatively, a more direct possibility is that this Pokémon could become invisible, or perhaps enter some kind of space and move through it. If it could become invisible or conceal its whereabouts, and also use Shadow Ball, then this Pokémon could be presumably a Ghost-type Pokémon. And there are many Ghost-type Pokémon that meet both of these characteristics. For example, Incubus, Jengar, Ghastly, Haunter, all of them can achieve both. Yu's brows furrowed. He seemed to have grasped a key point, but he couldn't quite find it. He felt as if he'd overlooked some detail. Annoyed, he scratched his long, black hair, which he'd tied up into a crown. Yu suppressed the fleeting inspiration and returned his attention to the field. Just as Yu was pondering this, the Pokémon hidden in the darkness launched another attack. As if it had discovered something interesting, A sudden, eerie, and excited laugh echoed from the darkness. It seemed as if the Pokémon hidden in the darkness was pleased with the performance of the previous group of Pokémon, or perhaps just wanted to play with its toys or pray to break its boredom. This time, the Pokémon's move, Shadow Ball, lacked the terrifying momentum of the first wave. Faced with this new wave of attacks, and without Charmeleon, Yu had to order a change in tactics. After all, the original circular formation. It could indeed protect everyone inside. But now, with Charmeleon's combat power gone, the position it was supposed to guard was left vacant. However, since they still hadn't discovered the enemy hiding in the shadows, they could only resort to defensive tactics. Pikachu, Suicune, Gyarados. Change formation. Use triangle formation. With no other choice, Yu ordered the original all-around circular formation to be changed to a smaller, more restrictive triangle formation. As the name suggests, a triangle formation requires Pokémon to be present at all three corners. Due to their strength, Pikachu and the other two Pokémon represented the three corners. As for the remaining Pokémon, they were left alone and retreated to the second line of defense. This might seem like a smaller defensive area, but in reality, it wasn't. Each Pokémon's area of defense actually expanded, as they went from defending the majority to defending the minority. While there were some gaps, Yu couldn't care less at this moment. Once again, just like before, Shadow Balls attacked from all directions. However, this time, Yu and his companions were already prepared. Therefore, the moment the Shadow Balls appeared, Yu's command rang out, Suicune, use Freeze Beam. Gyarados, you also use Freeze Beam. And Pikachu, you use 100,000 volts consecutively for an aerial attack. Perhaps drawing on previous experience, Yu believed that a single Freeze Beam wouldn't be enough to stop all the Shadow Balls. So, he used the double insurance policy, stacking 2 Freeze Beams. Of course, the Freeze Beams used weren't intended to be used directly against the enemy. Instead, they were used for defense, as the enemy's Shadow Balls were simply too numerous. As the two Pokémon continued to fire Freeze Beams, a visible wall of ice began to form around them at a visible speed, completely protecting them. While it couldn't offer any counterattack, the Freeze Beams from the two Pokémon were still quite effective. They complemented each other, multiplying the original Freeze Beam's power many times over. Whenever a Shadow Ball broke through the Freeze Beam's ice wall, Pikachu's 100,000 volts would instantly appear in front of the Shadow Ball. Then, it would abruptly slash the now powerless Shadow Ball, the resulting explosion barely blowing its fur back. Gyarados, Water Pikachu. The three Pokémon coordinated with each other. Whenever a Shadow Ball blasted a hole in the Freeze Beam's ice wall, the other would quickly fill it. This not only saved time, but also prevented both Pokémon from being as exhausted by the constant barrage of Freeze Beam. Pikachu, however, who appeared to be the most relaxed, was now struggling immensely. After all, the ice wall created by the double Freeze Beam, while sturdy, was no match for the opponent's Shadow Ball's powerful power. In the end, a gap would always remain. While Gyarados or Suicune would promptly fill it, the cleanup and finishing work fell entirely on Pikachu. As if realizing its skills weren't working, a sinister laugh echoed from the darkness once again, its voice filled with exasperation. But it was this very sound that stopped Yu, who had been frantically frantic. It was a flash of inspiration, a sense of something profound, as if grasped by it. The theme song from a detective story also began to play at this moment. Serena, who had accidentally looked up at Yu, was completely stunned. She didn't know if it was dazzlement or a hallucination. Serena actually saw that Yu had grown a pair of glasses on his nose. His traditional Chinese robes had vanished, replaced by a suit and a bow tie. But what was going on? Why does it feel like Yu's body is getting smaller and smaller, as if he is just an elementary school student at this moment? And what the hell are those floodlit glasses? Chapter 448 Absolute Zero Failure. The devil is 1 foot high, but the way is 10 feet higher. This was Yu's truest thought at that moment. Meanwhile, the smile on Yu's face grew wider and wider, and he was just short of laughing out loud to describe his current mood. Ho, there's only one truth. Jengar, I know you're playing a prank. Show yourself. Indeed, Yu, through layers of deduction, had finally deduced the true identity of the Pokémon currently hiding in the darkness. However, Yu's cry seemed to have no effect. At the mention of Jengar's name, that sinister laugh echoed from the darkness once again. Perhaps out of rage and embarrassment at being recognized, Jengar, hidden in the darkness, let out a sharp cry before launching another attack. Unlike the simple Shadow Ball attack from before, this time, there was only a ripple in the air, and a sinister, dark aura gradually gathered. Feeling the concentration of these skills and the aura they emanated, Yiyu's expression suddenly changed, and he cried out, "This is the wave of evil." While the wave of evil was roughly the same power as the Shadow Ball, Yiyu could sense from this wave that its power was even more terrifying. Damn it! Who dared to attack us? And how powerful is they? Yiyu felt a mixture of emotions. This was like sitting at home and suddenly disaster struck. He hadn't provoked anyone lately, had he? Especially since, while he was a battle fanatic, he wasn't an idiot. If it was a being far superior to him, let alone a fight, Yiyu wouldn't even bother. Because if he fought someone of equal strength, it could be considered a severing attack, and it could even boost his own combat power. But if he fought someone vastly superior, it wasn't a fight at all, it was simply a form of abuse. Therefore, even if Yiyu were to fight a being of this level, he would have sought out familiar faces, such as Kalos champion Karuna, Sinnoh champion Serena, and the fighting King Shiba. But he hadn't even bothered with this Pokemon hidden in the darkness, the Jengar he'd assumed was powerful. He didn't even know it existed. But at this moment, Yiyu couldn't care less. Regardless of the opponent's denial, he immediately assumed it was Jengar. Then, Yiyu stopped thinking about it and focused entirely on the situation at hand. Gyarados uses Freeze Beam, Suicune uses Absolute Zero, Pikachu uses 100,000 volts. Facing the wave of evil, Yiyu decided to switch to defensive siege. After all, blindly defending wasn't his style, and if he did, it would be too passive. Yiyu didn't want every bad thing to happen to him. Only by giving it his all could he succeed. The saying risking one's life in the face of danger probably holds true. Perhaps due to skill limitations, the Dark Wave couldn't be mass-produced like Shadow Ball, so there was only one. But don't underestimate this single unit, the power it emanated was far greater than that of several Shadow Balls. While the Dark Wave's power was immense, perhaps due to the Pokemon's battle-crazed nature, none showed the slightest fear. Each skill was unleashed without hesitation, attempting to completely block the Dark Wave. Perhaps driven by sheer urgency, Yiyu not only ordered his Pokemon to use their ultimates, but even Suicune's move, which had a chance of Absolute Zero, was used. Freeze Beam and Dark Wave collided. There was only a brief pause at the moment of contact, but then, unsurprisingly, Freeze Beam was crushed by Dark Wave. At a visible speed, the balance of power between the two skills gradually tilted in favor of Dark Wave. Seeing the Freeze Beam being pushed ever closer by the Dark Wave, Pikachu and the others weren't about to stand by and watch, oblivious to so-called morality and rules. Pikachu followed suit with a 100,000 volt attack, directly joining the fray between Dark Wave and Freeze Beam. With the added power of 100,000 volt, Dark Wave, which had been advancing with unstoppable force, faltered once again. It even seemed to be pushed back slightly, though only for a brief pause. Dark Wave, seemingly unleashing its full might, faced two completely different yet powerful attacks, Ice and Lightning. It showed no sign of retreating, and though its speed was slower than before, it continued to advance. Meanwhile, Suicune had been incredibly lucky today. He'd actually successfully used Absolute Zero, a probabilistic attack. However, the effectiveness and power displayed were far from satisfactory. Absolute Zero was a killer move. Yiyu had previously used this move with Suicune when facing a powerful foe, resulting in an instant kill. However, he had expected that after Absolute Zero was unleashed, Jengar, hidden in the darkness, would be killed instantly. However, this time, Yiyu was ultimately disappointed. The seemingly overwhelming force of Absolute Zero felt like more noise than action. The evening breeze rustled through the surrounding trees, as if nothing had happened, as if Jengar, lurking in the darkness and attacking, didn't even exist. How could this be? Even Absolute Zero can't force Jengar out of the darkness. This moment was the most complex feeling for Yiyu, the master. From the very beginning, Yiyu hadn't intended to involve Suicune in resisting the wave of evil. Instead, he intended to use Absolute Zero's powerful ultimate move to force Jengar out of hiding, allowing him to pinpoint his position and avoid being so passive. However, Yiyu had never imagined that Absolute Zero was indeed extremely powerful. However, he could not withstand the powerful Jengar, who was hiding in the darkness and using a cold attack. His strength was too high, and after using Absolute Zero, It was as if he had not used it at all. Chapter 449, Crazy. Water. Aside from the stalemate between Dark Wave, 100,000 volts, and Freeze Beam, Suicune was also deeply devastated. After all, the strongest skills, recognized by both himself and others, were completely ineffective. They were even less effective than Pikachu's 100,000 volts and Gyarados' Freeze Beam. After all, the intertwining black, purple, yellow, and icy blue energies on the field were so dazzling and magnificent. While his side was being outmatched, at least their usefulness was visible. But what about him? He had a powerful aura, a commanding name, and even plenty of screen time. Yet, even now, even skipping stones still made a noise. But thinking about it, this made sense. After all, while a skill's power was immense, its true strength ultimately depended on the Pokémon's own strength. After all, even such a powerful skill required sufficient strength to back it up. For example, if the power gap between the two Pokémon is significant, and one's own strength is insufficient, then even if you unleash a powerful move, the result will be something like what's happening with Suicune right now. Conversely, if your own strength is strong enough, then even the weaker skills you use can compensate, as the weaker Pokémon can lock onto your powerful moves to compensate. Furthermore, if the power gap between the two Pokémon is similar, the more powerful the skill, the greater the advantage. Therefore, it can be said that individual strength determines everything. In the face of absolute power, any scheme, any scheming, any clever trick, is vulnerable. Gyarados. Just as Yu and Suicune were becoming increasingly frustrated by the effects of Absolute Zero, Pikachu and Gyarados, still struggling, roared in unison. Gyarados' howl was fine, but Pikachu's now seemed shrill. Yu hurriedly looked in the direction of the sound. The situation was becoming increasingly dire. The combined power of 100,000 volts and Freeze Beam was no longer enough to halt the momentum of the evil wave, which was now only 2 or 3 meters away. Despite the distance, given the evil wave's momentum, Yu and his Pokémon would likely be on the ground in a matter of seconds. Most importantly, despite having been weakened for some time, the energy emanating from the evil wave was still incredibly potent. I'll fight you. Yu's eyes were bloodshot, his face filled with madness. Facing this evil wave, he was ready to fight to the death. He immediately commanded all the Pokémon still capable of fighting, Pikachu and Gyarados, keep up the damage. Suicune, use Water Cannon. Buzzbit, use Air Slash, and Crawlins, use Bubble Beam. At this moment, Yu's usual composure, the refined elegance of a man influenced by ancient Chinese scholars, was completely gone. Beyond madness, his face was filled with ruthlessness. This was a reckless abandon, a determination to die in glory rather than live in disgrace. It was a determination to drag someone down with him, even if it meant his own death. If any Chinese martial artists who knew Yu were present, they would surely cry out in horror, crazy, or roar, "Master Yu, you're looking for someone to fight again. Everyone, run," for at this moment, Yu was displaying his style to the fullest. In his fury, he was willing to sacrifice even his own life, truly living up to the nickname bestowed upon him by the martial arts world, the Ruthless Spear. Although this wasn't a martial arts world, where warriors fought for their lives, it was a battle of the very essence of martial arts. But to Yu, this was a duel between life and death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have constantly reminded his Pokémon to give their all in every battle, not holding back. Yu, what's wrong with him? Yu looks so terrifying right now. Yu, behind Yu, Serena and the other two looked on with worry, watching Yu, whose expression was utterly frantic and resolute. Faced with this situation, Serena and the other two felt a complex mix of emotions, especially after seeing Yu's expression. Although they had previously agreed to improve their strength together so they could help Yu and no longer be a burden, facing this situation, they felt helpless. They could do nothing but hide behind Yu, anxious and worried, silently watching everything unfold. It was one thing not to be able to fight alongside Yu, but given the current situation, Yu would likely have to distract himself from protecting them. While the three girls appear fragile, they are each incredibly strong and kind. Yet, at this moment, they fully unleash their true nature, their girlish instincts. Tears welled in their beautiful eyes, but as if afraid their cries would disrupt the battle between Yu and the others, they either hushed their voices, clenched their teeth, or covered their mouths tightly with their hands, trying to muffle any sound. While they worried about Yu, They also felt a surge of resentment at their own inability to help him due to their own lack of strength. Seeing the three girls' expressions, their Pokémon seemed somewhat bewildered. Especially Panda, believing Serena to be the first to save it, it clung to Serena. If Jengar hadn't attacked at this moment, with this refreshing development, Panda would have likely been convinced by the time Serena's birthday party was ready to begin. But all of this was disrupted after all. Seeing the person he loved actually shed tears at this moment, the naughty Panda was panicked. Obviously, it is a cute national treasure, but it is forced to turn into a monkey, jumping up and down like a monkey, which is very funny. Chapter 450 Fire Dinosaur Outbreak. Amidst a tense battle, a warm, yet sad, and comical atmosphere permeated the air. Within the so-called triangle formation Yu was studying, seeing Serena's tears, naughty Panda transformed from a cute, adorable giant panda into a hopping, scratching, monkey Pokémon. If the Chinese had seen naughty Panda like this, their hearts would have been broken. After all, this was their national treasure. And now, unexpectedly. But no matter how naughty Panda leaped up and down, Serena seemed oblivious, covering her mouth and silently weeping. Under normal circumstances, seeing the three women in tears would have left Yu bewildered for a moment. After all, he hated seeing girls cry. But right now, he paid no attention, his mind completely focused on the attack and the impending wave of evil. Although Yu was facing Pokémon, his long and experienced martial arts career had already faced countless death threats. He should have been fearless and calm in this situation, but this time, Yu seemed particularly agitated. The reason was simple: usually, he was the only one facing life and death, free from worries. But now, he was no longer free from worries. He was accompanied by the Pokémon around him, as well as his beloved son and daughter, who had been by his side since his journey, silently helping him and sacrificing themselves. Thinking that perhaps, because he was not as strong as others, he could not protect the people he cared about, and that they had to face life and death with him, Yu felt an inexplicable pang of shame. Could it be that Yu was not the only one experiencing this thought? The Pokémon, led by Pikachu, were also experiencing the same intense psychological reaction. While Pikachu and the others had faced such a predicament before, they had seen many kinds of things during their journey, including battles between legendary beasts, let alone facing a small attacker. But this time, they had been wrong. Because of Yu's connections, Pikachu and the others had previously battled champion-level Pokémon like Karuna and the others. But those battles were merely for sparring, or even to teach Yu and his Pokémon. Therefore, they hadn't used their full strength. Some even deliberately ordered the champion-level Pokémon to suppress their power, just to test Yu and the others' strength. So, in a sense, this might have been their first encounter with a threat of death. However, among all the Pokémon, the one most resentful wasn't Pikachu, but Suicune, the legendary Pokémon. Suicune felt a deep sense of frustration, thinking of how a legendary Pokémon had fallen to such a state. Being inferior to others would be fine, but when he fought against other Pokémon, they were completely ignored. This was a clear sign of disdain for him, a true disgrace among legendary Pokémon. But there was no time for reflection now, the danger was looming. However, with the addition of the Buzzbot and the Crab, while it didn't have much of an effect, the advance of the evil wave slowed down again. Jengar, hidden in the darkness, seemed to enjoy watching Yu and his group struggle to their death, but he didn't take advantage of the opportunity to attack again and cause them more trouble. If a Pokémon with the ability to see through was presented this moment, using it and looking around, it would have clearly seen Jengar perched on a thick branch of a tree not far from where Yu and his group were standing, watching the scene with relish. But at the same time, there was a sense of regret in his eyes, not for Yu and his group. He regretted that, in the face of such a great spectacle, he had forgotten to ask his master for a bag of sunflower seeds. Otherwise, when the sunflower seeds were ready, they would have made a grand appearance. Isn't that enough? Yu frowned, gritting his teeth. Lizzie, at that moment, a sudden roar erupted from behind Yu. Feeling the sudden rise in temperature behind him, and the heat wave hitting him, Yu's brain was a bit sluggish. What the hell was going on? Why did such a powerful force suddenly erupt behind me? Could I have been robbed? Although Yu seemed frantic at the moment, when he sensed danger, his brain was working furiously, and his reaction was extremely fast. He instinctively turned around to see what was happening behind him. Had the first enemy quietly breached his defensive formation and robbed him? But the scene he saw when he turned around completely stunned you. What caught his eye was a sea of red, a passionate red like a flame. A ball of flames blazed brightly, and at the center of the flames, the Charmeleon was like a flamecaller. The flame patterns that had originally adorned various parts of its body now seemed to come alive, flickering and pulsing under the flames. The flame on its tail, which had dwindled slightly due to its weakening ability, now merged with the flames enveloping it. The flames grew stronger, and with each firmer look in Charmeleon's eyes, the heat grew even hotter. Even Yu, its master, squinted as the heat continued to surge towards it, as if Charmeleon had completely transformed into a ball of flame. You know, for Pokémon like Charmeleon and Blaziken, their inherent flames faded as soon as they were close to their trainers, and even a touch wouldn't burn them. But now, as its trainer, and a relatively close one, Yu could actually feel the burning heat radiating from Charmeleon. What's going on? How could Charmeleon be like this? This flame is so hot. Xiaoxi swallowed, drops of sweat dripping down her delicate cheeks. He used his white jade-like palms as a fan and gently fanned his face, as if this would make him feel cool. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.